So a year and a day, how do you feel?
I feel a ton of anxiety knowing that I'm 35 days away from leaving my wife and kids, but I feel amazing considering it was really, in my opinion, the best possible outcome considering the depth of this case, right? And I just don't feel that I was ever going to get home confinement anyway. Maybe if I rode it all the way home, and I know Diane would argue that, but I still feel that the judge, who was amazing and very fair, wanted to make an example for future people that are bookmakers to deter them from possibly thinking, oh, I can just go do this and make a lot of money, and if worst case I only get home confinement and pay some taxes. I just think that was the message. That's my opinion.
So I've been to a lot of sentencing hearings. I had my ebbs and flows during it. So you're presenting, you're the one doing the selling in front of the judge. Like, what were you thinking throughout? Like, it's going to be maybe a year and a day, 15, 24 months. There was a question we're going to discuss, the judge asking the U.S. attorney, that I thought was very important. But like, what were you thinking throughout?
Throughout, I was thinking I wanted to get through all of my points. I had worked for hours and hours on what I was going to say to the judge, my argument, which really felt like a closing argument from a trial more than a sentencing. And I worked that hard on it, which I honestly don't always do because I know my cases. I can go in there and just
wing it,
yeah. Really. And I hate to say that, but I do and it's usually very successful. But this time I did not want to take any chance that I would forget anything. And I'll jot down notes. And as I did while the prosecutor was making her argument, I was taking notes of all the things. And you saw what my pad looked like. It was like,
and you would show me a lot of the paperwork, of what some of the stuff meant and what was going on.
Right.
Which I appreciated.
But, so I wanted to make sure I got through everything. When he started asking questions, I wasn't making any predictions. And, of course, I wanted the best outcome for Matt. And I know that he says he's happy with the outcome. I'm not, because I just felt that there were so many mitigating factors that he didn't take into consideration, especially, it was just an extraordinary case, that word I used over and over and over again in my argument. So I was frustrated. But as far as how did I feel while it was happening or what was I thinking, honestly, I wasn't thinking about where it was going. I didn't know what he was going to do. And I think it was the taxes, and Justin, you've had this experience over and over again. The tax issue, I think, was more serious to him. And that was the serious offense. It was an IRS case initially.
Sure.
The agent was an IRS agent. And I do think that was the issue for him.
Yeah, sending a message about paying your taxes. And I still believe personally that the bookmaking crime and the message of being high profile, I just think if I didn't go to prison, it really would have made him look bad.
And he said he was not taking that into consideration, that it was a high profile case.
Yeah.
But how can you not? There were 200 people there.
Yeah, I don't think he was as concerned about looking bad because, when you're a federal judge, you're appointed for life, so you don't have that influence. Judge Selna, Judge Carter, Judge Holcomb, they talk about this tax issue. They say you're an American, you have an obligation to pay taxes. I don't think it was the bookmaking. I don't think at all. I think he was persuaded by your argument where he had an obligation over the last 2 years to begin writing and rebuilding his life while the U.S. attorney's arguing. That's the reason you should send him to prison, the notoriety. It's like, should he sit in a cage for 2 years and do nothing while he waits to
well, and I said, it's not his fault that this became a high profile case. And I mentioned that, the journalist who brought this to light was in the courtroom. And I had no idea what I was getting myself into when I first took this case. This was a very straightforward case, sort of. For the most part.
Right.
But yeah, it was... I took him at his word when he said he was not taking that into consideration. I think, though, because the law says he has to deter crime by his sentences, that's what swayed him in that direction. Even though he acknowledged all of the mitigation, he almost said, yeah, there's a lot of mitigation, and I appreciate everything that you've done, but I'm still going to give you time, even though you did everything
Did you not have a number? He's getting... When I was sentenced, the government asked for 24 months, and I knew when Judge Wilson referenced some of my letters and that I'd made a restitution payment, I'm like, all right, I'm not getting 24 months, I get 18. Was there a point where you're like, okay, I'm not getting 15 or 21 or 36?
For me, to be honest, I thought the case was going bad at first.
Yeah.
And
it didn't start, it was trendy.
It started bad. And I say that because we already came in there with all her work. So she already did so much prior that the 15 months was already kind of a gift in my mind, truly. So like she was already fighting a battle that I knew that she probably was going to get some batted back down. But it's, he kept saying, I'm going to, I forget what the verbiage was, deny that, so to speak. And I kept thinking to myself, okay, am I going backwards right now? Am I 15 now, 18, 24? Because I've never been through this, right? But I also knew that at the end of the day, it's very hard for him to go too much higher from 15 months since the government was recommending that, in my opinion. So I felt comfortable with that. But because I've never been through this, I was getting a little nervous because she was fighting for stuff that, he wasn't really agreeing upon because he was saying it was already in the mitigation, so to speak. That's what I got out of it. And then as it got further along, and then she got so passionate about defending me and who I was, which actually made me very vulnerable when I went to speak to the judge. I started realizing that I could feel him feeling her, and then feeling me even, and then the even people weeping in the stands. My ex-wife's
his sports reference.
Yeah,
you can't help it.
In the audience.
But he was a bookmaker.
Yeah, not anymore. But I could feel like the courtroom itself, personally, changing. Like
he was very engaged. He listened to every single thing I said, and I have a lot of respect for him. I think he's extremely detail oriented. He's very, very smart. And I knew that he had read everything that I submitted. He commented on the letters that he received.
Yeah.
He said, your daughters, your wife, other service providers, he mentioned those things, and prison professors.
Right.
So I knew that he had read everything. I have to tell you just a little anecdote. The very first time I did a sentencing hearing was in front of Judge Carter. And I said, I don't know if the court has read my papers. Big mistake.
Yeah.
That's like an insult to them,
Carter
even though you're not meaning to, right?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yes. So from that moment on, I've always said to the judge, I know you've read everything. There are just a few points I want to remind the court about.
That's smart. I could see that.
Oh my God. So I knew he had read everything. And again, there were certain things I couldn't talk about in open court because they were filed under seal. And so I just alluded to those things. And, he nodded, but he was totally engaged. He was thoroughly engaged. And he did thoroughly appreciate how many people were there to support you.
Yeah.
For me, even, because I knew there was going to be a lot of media. And so I said, friends and family, raise your hand, just so the court could know who was friends and family versus media. And it was almost everyone in the room.
Right.
I was blown away, and I'm sure he was. In fact, I don't know if you remember, Judge Guilford used to count the number of people in the courtroom there to support my client.
And Judge Carter will ask people to identify themselves sometimes too.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
We'll go back to the beginning. So now that you've been sentenced, what was it like walking outside and talking about getting sentenced to prison in front of media, and that moment of having to do that in front of Nicole, who was very clearly impacted by the reality that you were going to prison. So walk us through those interviews.
The when he said a year and a day, just the relief already started. And then, of course, it felt like forever after that because he was doing reading all that stuff that was...
There's a big process.
Those things matter, but at the time, you're not...
I didn't care at that point. I just wanted to get...
Yeah, we talked about courtroom
I just wanted to get out of there.
Yeah. Courtroom dysphoria, where you don't hear anything the judge says. So you and I were talking, and I was kind of thinking, maybe we should be listening, but it doesn't matter. He knows
you did get 2 years of supervision. That most people get 3.
Oh, yeah.
That is a big win.
She, Kristen Williams, that's her.
The U.S. attorney.
Yeah, she said, I'm okay with 2. And I was like, that's great.
Yeah, he said probation is recommending 2. You wanted 3. And she said, 2's fine.
Yeah.
I think I finally did get through to her on some level because,
for sure.
Her sentencing memo basically shot down every factor in mitigation that I argued. And I was really upset. And I called her and I was like, I feel like you're almost just doing this to show how smart you are and that you can argue against what I'm saying. That's what it felt like to me. Like, I'm smarter than you and I have a comeback for everything that you say. It wasn't that. It was that we represent different interests.
You got that right.
And and I want to just make sure, because this is an interesting point the judge brought up. He said, I'm actually doing him a favor by giving him a year and a day, because most people don't understand. If you're sentenced to a year in federal prison, you do a year in federal prison.
Right.
If you're sentenced to 10 months, you do 10 months. If you are sentenced to a year and a day, then the Bureau of Prisons can give you good time credits and earn time credits.
Here's when I knew it was going in a good direction. when she was arguing that you shouldn't get credit for the 1.6 million you paid because it's like required in the plea, but it's like it's required in every plea, but nobody pays. So it's like you're going to hold it. Yeah, that was done really, really well. It's like that was one of like her main argument together with the media attention, and you have an opportunity to make an example out of him. It's like you should be rewarded for what you've built over 2 years. I think that's part of the reason you advocated so well on his behalf, because you saw the effort and you wanted to match that effort.
Yes.
But when she was mentioning you shouldn't get credit for the 1.6, I'm like, oh, I knew it wasn't going to be 15 months.
And when I said it's on page 3, paragraph 1 or line 1, whatever, I saw him looking through the papers. He was trying to find that language.
Yeah.
Which said, that you were to pay. And if you remember, we litigated this with the former AUSA on the case.
Right.
Because it initially said you are to pay restitution at or before the time of sentencing.
Correct.
And I was on the phone with him and emailing back and forth saying, this is impossible. He's going to be in breach before we even get started. You can't make him pay $1.6 million before sentencing. How's he going to do that? And so he actually changed the language for us.
Which we were able to do. And remember, we couldn't even, I had it in my tax attorney's account because they couldn't even tell us where to send the money.
Exactly.
Which I thought was crazy.
We were waiting for an agreement letter from the tax division in DOJ because they're in charge of all the tax decisions.
Right.
And there were other issues that came up with the IRS that luckily we had 2 brilliant tax attorneys on our side. And again, when it came to drafting the plea agreement, there was an issue where they were ordering you to pay a couple like fines and penalties or something. And so your tax attorney, Jonathan, it was Sandra Brown, who used to be the head of the tax division. And she said, this is just boilerplate language. It doesn't have to be in there. And the AUSA said to me, well, this is in every one of our plea agreements. And I said, yeah, I'm going to have Sandra Brown call you.
Yeah.
And a few minutes later, he called me back and said, okay, we'll take that language out. So, I mean, we'd been fighting tooth and nail from day one on your case.
No, the behind the scenes effort that was done for the last 2 years all played out in court, but no one really knows.
No one knows what happened.
All the work,
that 15 months, it looks like, oh, that's because the government offered him, 8 levels for cooperation. But when in reality, we had negotiated, they only focused on 2022.
Right.
And there were other benefits that are outside of this conversation that But it was 2 years of a lot of back and forth and a lot of work. But that she was arguing that, well, he was supposed to pay restitution. And I went on ChatGPT, to be honest, what percentage of federal defendants pay restitution? And it was, I can't remember which was which, but they only receive, 7%. I think, 7% of the money that they're supposed to receive. And I think only 10% of defendants actually pay.
Right.
And so I was arguing that, like, just because he's supposed to doesn't mean he's going to. I have a client who stole $22 million from a bunch of people, vulnerable victims, life savings. And, Judge Carter said to the victims who were in the courtroom, I'm sorry to say this, but you are not getting your money back. And I was promising, my client's going to pay, my client's going to pay. We walked out of court and my client said, those people are never getting a penny. I was horrified.
Well, some people, that's right. Some people think they've got the prison term in my freedom. I mean, it's very helpful that you paid it. I want to come back to the beginning in a minute. So let's talk about what do you do before, so you ask for Lompoc, most likely you'll get it. What do you do before surrendering to prison? Like, what does the next 30 days look like?
Well, I immediately called my pretrial officer this morning. I text her on Friday to update her because I'm pretty proactive. And so I told her that I got a year and a day, and then she didn't respond, of course. And then on
Dario, the prior pretrial services officer, would have responded. Differing people.
He probably would have came over to my house and said hi. But this pretrial officer, who's been very kind, she picked up the phone this morning. I called her right at 9, and she said to me, okay, I understand. I'm catching up from the weekend. You got a year and a day? And I said, yes. I said, I have a few questions. I just want to know, number one, when will you find out if I get accepted to Lompoc? Because I want to tell my family. I said, number two, as far as me for traveling, I said, now I'm having more open conversations with her that I wouldn't have had before. I said, I don't know if you're aware, I've wrote a book. She said, yeah, I'm aware of your book. I said, clearly, I'm working. I'm trying to give back to the community. I'm trying to inspire people. I'm trying to make money. I have a lot of obligations. And in those obligations, I have an opportunity for book signings, going down doing podcasts. I'd like to travel. And she said, well, let me tell you the rules of travel. You can travel all the way. As long as you send me your itinerary and tell me exactly where you're going and what hotel you'll be, as long as I know you're not going to flee, which I'm very confident you're not going to, I can allow you to travel up until October 1st, because 7 days prior to your turning yourself in, I will zero chance I'll allow you to travel. And I said, okay, that's fair. So I submitted a text to her with a whole outline of what I wanted to do and exactly where I was going. And she already sent back that I'm tentatively approved until I give her the flight info. And I was very happy with that. So to answer your question, I'm going to continue to build my brand and sell my book to get people to follow my journey and see what I'm doing and show the next chapter of my life, which I always plan on being bigger and better than what I was before. Because for the first time in my life, as I said to the media after I walked out of the courtroom, now I finally have an opportunity where the other person on the other side of my, business deal is going to win. It's not just win-lose, it's win-win.
Right.
And that is the best feeling I've ever had in 50 years of life, because you guys know this, because you actually do something where, and so do you, where both people benefit from your product. And I've never had that. It's always, I hope this guy loses all his money,
right,
or I'm selling commodities to somebody I know they're probably going to lose their money. It's all negative. I got to call back and tell them how much they lost and how try to sell them on the next thing. I don't have to do that anymore. And frankly, I feel free.
That's awesome.
That being said, I have 35 days roughly before I report to prison. So I'm trying to juggle doing all this work and then spending as much time as I can with my wife and kids, who I could feel they're struggling, knowing, the reality of life, that first time in my life I'll be away from them. Today we went into Kingston School and we walked in.
It's your 4-year-old son.
My 4-year-old son, yeah. We walked in and I was, for the first time, I was like, I normally would have not went to drop him off at school with her because we'll switch off or whatever. And I'm like, I got to make effort to go to these little things, because I only have 35 days of this left. So we both took him to school and then we walked in. He wasn't there on Friday. They kind of asked why. And I was like, how do I handle this? And then me being me, we walked out and I turned to Nicole and I said, you know what? The right thing to do is inform them what's really going on in our life. So I could feel her like have that, because she's a little more private than me. So I went back in and I told Kingston's preschool teacher, and she said, thank you for sharing. Do you mind if we sit down with the principal? I said, of course. So I went to the principal's office, which I've been in many times in my life, and sat down and had to swallow like this uncomfortable conversation. I could see Nicole. She started to cry because they were very kind and sweet, but they could feel her and they could feel me just knowing that I'm going to go to prison. This little 4-year-old boy is going to be without his dad for 8 months to a year. And then I just told him, I said, I have to be accountable for a poor decision I made. I was running an illegal bookmaking operation, and I just wanted to inform you guys that this is what's happening in our household. So
because it may affect him, he may act out in school, and he's a handful anyway.
You think?
He's a 4-year-old boy, like times 10. I mean, it's so funny because the other day, right before we went to court, I think he was like grabbing Nicole's crotch or something. He was like trying to lift. And the first time I met him, he grabbed her boob.
Yeah, he does
Poor
both of
Nicole,
those.
and she's so like, I know she's strong and fit, but she's also very petite and delicate.
Yeah.
And so it was like, poor Nicole was getting attacked by her son.
He's very vicious.
But oh my goodness. And
yeah.
Also, just as an aside, seeing him with his sisters too was awesome.
Yeah, he loves them, and
they obviously love him.
We're blessed because I have a really close knit family, but obviously this is definitely our first really big rocky, situation, I would call it, other than losing my brother, 6 years ago. But like,
how do you explain it to Kingston? Where does he think you're going?
We're not going to. We're just going. Our plan is to act as if I'm on a work trip, because time for a 4-year-old, as you guys know, is so undetermined how they figure it out.
Right.
He's going to ask for me, and she's going to say he's at work, and we're going to play that role.
He's not going to remember.
I don't think so, but
I've been through this. In time, when he's more mature, you'll tell him this is an easier age than the teens.
Yeah.
Teens are 12.
Your daughter. It's
that's been a struggle.
Yeah.
Because that's the most like vulnerable. I have an 11-year-old, and I can see it like more emotional and tough, and reliance. That you can't fake. That will be harder than it would be for Kingston.
Yeah.
By far. And she's still, I could feel her. And then my daughter is the type of person that doesn't want to show her emotions to me because she cares so much that doesn't want to hurt me.
Sage?
Yeah. So she like won't cry in front of me, and then she'll cry in front of her sisters, and then I feel more guilt because I want her to feel comfortable to open up to me.
Yeah.
And then the other day, or the night before, is when she bawled for like 20 minutes, and I was just holding her. I'm like, man. So then, for me,
Fine that day though.
she was strong, but I have to do that dad talk of like, look, I always just tell him, like, I made a mistake. I got to be accountable. We're a family. We're a team.
Yeah.
If you ever make a mistake, you have to be the type of person that looks in the mirror and just says, okay, I got to own this.
Right.
And guess what? You're showing strength as a family, which is why I rented a Sprinter van, which you probably thought I was nuts. But
I didn't.
no, but I wanted to show unity coming into the media, like, hey, this guy's going to prison. He's about to get sentenced, whatever. But there's his kids standing right behind him, and his mom, and everybody else, because
and your
thankfully,
in-laws.
yeah, I mean, I wanted them to see that we're a team.
Yep.
And
he acknowledged that. He acknowledged
it will be really important when they visit you. So let's talk about what are some of the plans in prison. What do you plan? What are you going to do?
I found out at Lompoc that you get 6 points a month. You're probably more aware of this than anyone, but so every time Nicole visits, costs 2 points. So she can only come 3 times.
Oh.
And I don't know if that's 3 times a person, I assume.
No, I believe each visit would be points, and you can have a certain amount of people join.
Okay.
They probably have to go in together, though some wardens will allow like 2 people to come and then 2 more to join. Some say if 2 come, they have to leave and they have to come in. It's points each time. It's kind of different policies.
We're not sure yet. We're going to feel that out,
I don't know where he is.
He would know that he's in a prison, because even though he would be in the camp, you're going to see the adjacent low security prison with the razor coil and barbed wire. Then there's a strip search when you go in, maybe not of the children, but certainly of Nicole. Oh yes, there's in these camps, as you would presume, there's hustling going on. There's drugs.
Bones.
There's this.
Oh yeah.
There's this new K2 synthetic drug that you can smuggle in.
I went to visit somebody and I didn't get.
Oh, there's then you're in many of these prisons. They are absolutely going to search you. They'll certainly look through the bag to make sure nothing inappropriate isn't coming in.
Metal detector.
The prisoners will get searched coming and going. Though after you're there for a while, they may say, okay, this guy's fine, let him come and go. But they can make it difficult on some people, including some high-profile people, if they don't like you, which is why it's important that you adjust properly. They can shut down a visit if you're not dressed properly. They'll say, you can't come in. You should bring an extra set of clothes. We'll go through all that stuff. But Kingston would certainly know he's visiting his dad in a different environment. If you're there during count time, you're going to stand for count. It's different. You're going to know that you're in prison. And it can be kind of a hopeless experience too, visitation, because that's where a lot of people get a lot of bad news. My point is, it'll be a great chance for Nicole and your daughters, I think, to see. And I'm not saying Kingston shouldn't go. My point is, he's going to know he's going to know dad's not at work, not in that uniform.
Right.
But it can be a spot for them to really see how productive you are. I filmed a video earlier about kids who don't want to see their dad in prison because all he does is complain. It's not my fault. The government screwed me. And it's like, it's a lot of work to go and see him. We don't want to go see him. So it'll be really important that you're setting the right tone.
Well, you know me.
I know you will.
That's the last thing I'll be doing.
I know that.
And I'll make the best of everything. I plan on maybe writing another book, not even about chapter 2 of my life. But I've after meeting with Japanese media, I came up with a conclusion, an idea by talking to them that they really don't care about Matt Bowyer in Japan, which doesn't surprise me. So I asked him, I said, I was just real straightforward with him. I said, you read my book, would it sell in Japan? I was just curious because I was thinking about translating it into Japanese, trying to sell it. And he's like, no, there's not enough about Shohei and Ippei in here.
Yeah.
He said, but my suggestion to you is write another book and just make it all about that part only.
Chapter 6, I believe, yeah.
Yeah, so just expand on that. I thought about it more, and I was like, I'll just do that while I'm in prison.
That's great.
And then I'll just have it translated into Japanese and see what happens.
Well, speaking of that story, do you want to talk about that story?
We can talk about anything you like.
I mean, this is a good time to bring that up.
Yes, let's talk about that.
Agenda.
So when Matt hired you right after you got into trouble, you just thought it was a tax case. You didn't know Shohei was involved.
I had no idea what I was getting myself into.
Neither did I. When you called and said a client of mine is going to call you.
Exactly.
And I'm rolling down the 5, and then he called.
So,
And by the way, you turned around faster than anyone in history to come pick up a few dollars.
that's funny. Well, so I was introduced to Matt through a colleague of mine who is a friend of Matt's, and he is a marijuana lawyer, so he doesn't do a lot of federal work.
Right.
And he knows me, and he knows that I'm the go-to person. So he introduced me. We met at Matt's house on a Saturday.
We did.
We sat in his kitchen, and Saturday or Sunday, whatever. And I was told he was an illegal bookmaker and really didn't understand the money laundering aspect at that point in time, because obviously it was a lot of detail, a lot of information for me to
Digest.
assimilate. Yes. And I don't even know if we talked about taxes at that point.
I think you brought it up. I mean, because you clearly were trying to figure out what's going on here.
But I knew that the lead agent on the case was an IRS agent. So, you know, we talked, I mean, obviously it's a money case, so the IRS is going to be involved. They're involved in pretty much every fraud case, but not as lead. So the case started out that way. In fact, I think this is something you may or may not remember, because I've listened to some of your videos. You had talked about how you were raided in 2015 and they took your money and left. And so you were kind of still in denial at that point.
Oh, I don't doubt that.
Yeah. And you were like telling Chris, well, I don't know if I really need a lawyer.
Yeah.
And so you were kind of.
Well, I was hoping for the same outcome.
Yeah.
As
They
round
just took
one.
your money and Nicole's purse.
But when you were in his home having that conversation, you had already been raided?
I was raided,
You were raided,
but not charged technically, meaning I haven't received any,
and
you know.
and you didn't think it felt really different than a decade earlier?
Oh, no, it
Maybe
felt
like-
different.
Right, but you were you were hopeful that maybe
Of course I was.
it would be the similar outcome.
Well, of course, it's like, you know, the stages of grief, right?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I knew it was different, but I was hoping that maybe there was a way to weasel my way out of this thing, to be honest. And, you know, frankly, I've dodged a lot of bullets in my life, technically, and I was hoping to dodge another one. And I definitely didn't want to hire her if I didn't have to. No offense to her, because I didn't want to go down that path. I was like, is there any other form of mitigation? Like, take another bag of cash and let me go. So
Yeah, you can't bribe the U.S. government.
Yeah, I don't mean bribe. I just meant like, is there, you know, is there a fine or something?
You were hopeful they'd make an offer.
Yes. Yes.
And I was pretty sure immediately that you were going to be charged.
Yeah.
And so I reached out to the government, and you had certain parameters. You know, I said, look, we got to get in front of this. We have to be proactive, and we need to go talk to them and hopefully get you a pre-indictment deal.
Right.
And you said, I am not going to talk about myself. There was a certain topic that they wanted to discuss. I don't want to talk about it publicly. And you said, I'll talk about that, but I'm not going to talk about myself. And I said,
You mean the casinos? I think it's pretty okay. The whole world knows. I've been on every podcast saying it, unless you're uncomfortable.
Okay.
But yes.
Well, so yes, they wanted to talk to you about the casinos and what they knew. And you said, I will tell them everything they want to know about the casinos, but I'm not talking about myself. And I
or
said,
any
or
person.
anyone else, yes.
Yeah, period.
And I said, I've been doing this for almost 30 years, and I have never been in a proffer where they said that you don't have to talk about yourself, because your credibility as a witness is what's important to them.
Right.
And you have to be honest about what you've done in order for them to be able to use you as a witness. But I reached out, and lo and behold, they said, that's fine.
Well, let's backpedal a little bit.
There was one question that they wanted you to answer when we first got there, which was, are you an illegal bookmaker?
Yes, and I joked and said no, but which we brought up in
They said, they were going to charge you with lying to a federal agent.
Yeah,
You were just joking.
I literally was joking, because I was like, obviously.
Yes. So that was the first question when we had the meeting.
Correct.
I let you answer that question.
Yeah, which was easy. But going backwards, I want to remind you, this is our first, we've had a few spats in our great relationship, and you were adamant. In fact, my wife was getting upset with me because I wouldn't agree with you. You were adamant about, that's not going to fly. It's unacceptable. And I said to you, which is great, because I feel like you learned something. And then, of course, you taught me a lot in 2 years. So like the message of what I'm about to say is, I feel like you should never give up or give in. And you fought for me, and it worked. Thank God.
In this case, though, I think that your case is extraordinary. I think that I've said this many times, your case is collateral damage from the investigation that they were already doing. There was the Wayne Nix case, and there was the Scott.
Yeah, I wasn't the target per se.
You were not who they were originally looking at. You were just somebody who kind of came up in the course of other investigations. And so, I mean, it was an extraordinary situation, because they had a much bigger fish to fry.
Right.
than you. But
Yeah.
you were a pretty big fish too.
Well, I think I was much bigger than they thought, and even you thought, but you are correct. I have a feeling if I was the main target, they would have said, absolutely not.
Right.
We're not going to have this conversation. He's either talking or not. And I see why you were saying what you were. But my point is, you should always, not you, people should always fight and try to do whatever they can
Absolutely.
to avoid, or even mitigate at the same time, which is why we work so well together, because there were times where, you would pull me here and I would pull you back and we would meet in the middle, and it ended up working out perfectly, really.
It absolutely did. And yes, it's true. I mean, there's no harm in asking the question, right? I can always call or email a U.S. attorney and say, look, this is what we're proposing. If they say no, they say no, but at least I asked.
Right.
And in this case, they said yes.
Yeah.
And that was remarkable. And we walked in and they gave you back all of Nicole's purses, which I was ecstatically happy about.
And my watch.
Yes. And I was, I mean, they took some cash that you're not getting back, but
Right. Oh, you'll still fight for that too.
yeah, eventually it'll go towards your tax penalties or something. But so we were basically operating under the assumption that you were going to be pleading guilty to illegal bookmaking, money laundering, and filing a false tax return, which is what you did plead guilty to.
Right.
And that the tax count is the one, because sentencing calculations are often based on money. And so that was a number that they could use to craft a sentence for you using the tax number. And so that's where we thought we were going. And then did you get a certified letter from Tisha Thompson?
Well, this is where there's a little surprise, little surprise that you're not aware of. That,
Okay, here we go.
I knew I was going to have to tell you one day, which you're not going to like, but and the other person involved is not going to like this, but I figured it would have already came up. So when Tisha Thompson sent me a FedEx letter, it said basically, I'm flying into Orange County and we have some pertinent information to discuss about you and your operation. And I'd like to sit down and give you an opportunity to verify or whatever. I don't know the exact verbiage. I reached out to a friend of mine and we discussed it without you on the phone. And then we got you involved, I believe, after that. Well, let me take that back. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I believe our first reaction was, which is what happened, was to invite her into my home and sit her down without you present.
Before our phone call?
Yeah, which is what happened.
What?
And we sat her down and let her tell us. We made an agreement with her.
Chris?
Yes, Mr. Glue was.
Okay, well, he was there. That's okay.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
But the yin and yang of you and Chris is very, very strong, actually. It's a great
We are so different, and I respect him so much.
No, you guys are both amazing, which truthfully, he's been, helpful from day one, and then you've done everything, really. But he sat her down and we made an agreement that she would spill the beans of whatever, and we would either confirm, deny, or be quiet.
Right.
Which mostly was...
That's what we did on the phone, the three of us.
Yeah, but it was already
It had already been done.
Yeah.
Well,
but
I feel left out. I'm not angry. I just feel left out.
But the strategy was not to leave you out for any other reason other than maybe just let's feel this out before
Right.
there's any reactions.
And it was my understanding that Chris had spoken to her and
He did.
She told him everything that she knew, and she knew everything.
Well, he did. It's just it was at my house and I was present.
Right, which I didn't know until now.
So that was the part that was left out, which is not a big deal. But
No, I mean, you said that there was something I didn't know, that there was a surprise.
that was it.
Okay, that's. I mean, look, I'm just like, why did you?
How
leave
did
me out?
Tisha even find out that Ipe was gambling?
Well, so
I could answer that.
Okay.
I mean, because I have a big mouth and I would tell people that Shohei Ohtani was my client to use
when I
it.
first met you, you said Shohei Ohtani is my client, and
Yeah.
I said, "Who's Shohei Ohtani?" I had no idea.
Yeah. Because at that
Are you
time,
convinced that how it is through you and just talking on the golf course or gambling, it came out?
like I wouldn't obviously have a poster, but
Yeah.
if I felt, of course I told her because she was my attorney, if I felt there was something, an advantage I could use in building my business or impressing somebody, then yes, I would say it. Because at that time, I believed he was my client, truly.
And he was just doing the bets for him, which would make sense because the wires are coming from him, your client.
Correct.
I think most people would deduce that.
Yeah.
Let me just ask you. So, was the conversation then that we had, Chris, you, me, and Tisha, was that just theater?
No, it wasn't theater. It was adding more to what was.
Okay.
See, when she first came, actually, we already knew some of the things that she had known, but we never really said much. It was just getting information. That's when we brought you in because you were now handling my case. And now we are going to actually confirm some things.
Right. I was already your lawyer, wasn't I, when she came
You
out?
were, but meaning like when she was just spilling the beans,
Yeah.
we weren't going to say anything.
Yeah, because you hired me in October and this happened in January.
Correct.
We got a call from her. What was really interesting about that call, from my perspective, was she said, these are the things I know. And yes, we said, you'll tell us what you know and we'll confirm or deny.
Correct.
And she knew people's names. She knew dollar amounts.
No, she knew a lot.
She knew a lot. And so we were willing to talk to her. And you were on the phone just to kind of jump in if you had to.
Right.
And, we could say, my understanding is, no, you never met Shohei Ohtani, never talked to him.
Correct.
So she said, okay, because her understanding was Shohei Ohtani was your client.
Right.
And he was wiring you money and $500,000 every 2 weeks.
Right.
And we said, no, absolutely not. Shohei Ohtani was not his client. Or we certainly can't confirm that he was his client.
Correct.
The only person you ever met was Ippei Mitsuhara, the only person you ever had any communication.
Well, was the point in doing that so she wouldn't, with hopes that she wouldn't run the story?
Well, that's exactly what happened. So she said, okay, I need to go do more journalism.
Or so you bought some time?
And she said, though, the feds are going to leak the story to the LA Times.
Which they did.
Which I was like, how does she know this? Of course, they have sources everywhere. So, it's an interesting industry that I don't know anything about, but I've certainly learned a lot about in the course of your case.
Yeah, in this case.
And so March rolls around, and I got a call from a reporter from the LA Times, and he said, I'm writing a story about your client, Mathew Bowyer, and how Shohei Ohtani is his client. And I said, Shohei Ohtani is not my client's client.
Right.
And he said, well, why is the FBI so certain that he is? And I said, well, you have to ask the FBI that question. And by the way, you just outed your source.
Yeah.
And he said, no, I didn't. And I said, yeah, you did. He
Right.
goes, I just asked you a question. I was like, all right, whatever. And then he said, well, we're going to write the story. And I said, this is the LA Times. You're going to ruin the greatest baseball player that the Dodgers have ever had.
Right.
And the LA Dodgers, when I'm telling you that I cannot confirm that what you're saying is true. And he was pretty much of an asshole about it. And so I immediately, because Tisha had so much integrity and she didn't write the story,
Right.
I immediately called Tisha Thompson and I said, hey, you were right. LA Times just called. They're going to run the story. And that's when she went and interviewed Ippei. Mm-hmm. And you might want to take it from there.
Yeah. So come to find out, she told me that he admitted that Shohei Ohtani sent a wire transfer for him, clearly, and told her for 90 minutes a lot more information that she won't disclose to me that will be aired one day on a 30 for 30 podcast from ESPN, which is going to be interesting, which really doesn't matter because the Dodgers came in and shut that down and said he lied, or he said he lied.
Whatever happened
there, who knows?
Within a day, everything changed.
Correct.
And then the story came out 5 days after I spoke with Tisha and the LA Times guy.
Right.
That Ippei had stolen the money from Shohei Ohtani,
Right.
and that Shohei Ohtani knew nothing, and Shohei made a public statement. And then from there, so after the phone call with Tisha, though, back in January, you had a cooperation agreement with the U.S. government. And
Right.
so we said, we better go have an emergency meeting with them. So we all rearranged our schedules and we had a meeting with them.
Correct.
And we told them everything, and they could not have cared less.
It was very interesting, but we wanted to be certain, which worked out better later, that I got cooperation credit for something that was going to come out in the media anyway.
We knew it was going to happen.
Yeah.
So we wanted to be the first in, but they couldn't have cared less. They started asking you questions about the other stuff. And I
Yeah.
said, this is not about that. This meeting is only about this. And that's it. We're done. And we got up and left.
Right. They just wanted to know if he bet baseball, which we all know he did not.
Right.
And then once I confirmed that, they seemed to not be concerned whatsoever.
And I think they asked about David Fletcher.
Yeah, they did actually.
Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit more about Ippei?
Of course.
Because that is like the greatest job in the world. You're
Right.
on the Dodgers, but you have no responsibility to perform.
Yes.
Kind of like me at USC. I'm on the team in uni. Don't have to contribute much. It's pretty stress-free.
Yeah.
What a job with that relationship, how close they were. Can you tell us about how much they did together from what you knew?
Yeah.
And did he ever just flat out say to you, something like, I had the greatest job in the world for the greatest athlete and I threw it away. I need more interaction with Ipe because you two were.
He didn't have much interaction. He wasn't a man of many words.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, he was really quiet, very respectful, very honest, to be honest. I mean, maybe he stole money. I don't know. That's still up for debate whether Shohei knew or not, but he definitely was honorable. He was trying to pay every time he could. I mean, he was sending, in my opinion, I think I figured it out later that he was waiting for the wire or paycheck to come in from the Angels, and then he would send me the $500,000.
Was it the Angels or the Dodgers?
Angels then.
Then it was?
Yeah.
Oh, back then.
Yeah. And so you could feel it because now it's easy to piece together later, right? And why he would push me off and wait, and then I think the wire would come in and he would send it. But anyway, he never really said anything about losing his job or any of that
He
because
talked to me.
yeah, I actually spoke more to her about this because once it all broke, which they showed all our text messaging, I said to him, it's all a cover up. That's my last text to him.
Which was in his indictment.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then he responded, which I've discussed this on many podcasts. Technically, keyword.
Oh, interesting.
Technically, it's not. I fucked up. So why would someone say technically?
Well, and it's exactly what Shohei did in his press conference. He said, I didn't knowingly
Correct.
pay for his gambling.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And I actually believe all that.
I believed what he said.
Yeah.
What's interesting about Ipe, in my opinion, because I read his letter to the judge and I filmed a video about it, and the level of a lot of rationalizations. I was underpaid. I did 2 jobs.
Right.
Essentially, he was his assistant and interpreter.
Mm-hmm.
I think that allowed him to continue, I guess, the stealing. He felt as if he was, I guess, underappreciated.
Right.
And this is what you and I always talk about, or I always talk about, how prosecutors don't make the best defense attorneys because they don't understand how important it is to express remorse and not make excuses.
Yes.
They are prosecutors. They're not.
It was a terrible letter, but I don't fault him. He's not American. A number of people left comments on the video from Japan that said this is more of our culture here. And I said, that's fine, but he's getting sentenced in America.
Right.
And he's going to a low security prison, not a camp, because he's not an American citizen. He's all the way in Pennsylvania fighting it.
Right.
He could have done better. Come back to, we had talked in the past, they did a lot of things together. Didn't you say they'd go to the gym together?
Oh, yeah.
And they were very close friends.
They were inseparable.
Right.
They were best of friends, period. Every time I was with the Angels organization, spring training, baseball games, a poker event, which he was there, Shohei was not golfing because they don't golf, but I would go to spring training games. I have pictures of a Diablo Stadium. I even have pictures of Shohei batting in the cage underground. You know, I have a lot of times where I was around these guys and they were together every second.
Yeah.
And he even did his dry cleaning, took his dog in, did all kinds of things that it's not normal.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't because he was his personal assistant, let's call it, but he really was his friend, best friend.
Mm-hmm.
And they spent every minute together. He had to because he couldn't speak English, number one, especially then, very little. And number two, they were just close. I mean, they really were best of friends.
I recall when we started doing more work together, the resilience of Shohei. There would be news about people alleging that he knew and he was the one gambling. Then 2 home runs and 3 hits, and it was pretty impressive. His ability to just focus.
Yeah.
Although his first game, I think after.
Well, it took him 8 games to hit it. It took him 8 games to hit a home run.
Yeah, they started talking about it at first.
Yes, then
he shut that up real quick.
Yeah,
because he is remarkable. I mean,
yes,
truly. I mean, look what he's doing now.
Yeah. So let's talk then.
Well, let me just say, because I spoke with Ipe.
Yeah.
Matt gave him my phone number because he wanted a referral for a lawyer.
You tried to connect me to him as well, and you said you can't.
I always try to help my amazing team.
Yes, you do.
So yes, you do. And so he called me. Actually, I was sitting in my car at the parking lot of Trader Joe's, and he called, and I said, he said, Matt gave me your number. He said good things about you, and my first comment to him was, "You came back," because they had been in Korea for spring training,
Right.
and he knew this was gonna blow up in his face.
Yeah.
And that was it was just a spontaneous utterance. I just said, "You came back?" And he said, "What, I shouldn't have?" And I said, "Well, your family is here, so you obviously had to come back." And I said, "I'm so sorry, you've lost your best friend." And he said, "I did this to myself." And I said, "Well, look, I can't represent you. It's a conflict of interest." But I referred him to a friend, and my friend who he didn't hire, but he spoke with him for about 3 hours. And my friend was convinced he should have hired him. Yes, absolutely. But my friend was convinced that Shohei was not involved, and that absolutely Ipe did what he said he did, ultimately what he said he did.
Right.
And I think that my friend is a former prosecutor and a very astute judge of character and whether somebody is lying to him or not.
Sure.
And he believed him. And so to me, because he's the kind of person who will say,
yeah, this is
yeah, this
BS.
guy's lying. He's a fraudster or
Okay.
whatever. Yeah. And so that was, I thought, very interesting.
And you met with Major League Baseball.
No,
I did not.
I had a
She
Zoom
spoke to
call.
them.
I think Nicole and I maybe did.
I think when you were on the Zoom with Nicole, maybe you did. But
You
yeah.
know what? I think maybe I was already at your house in a meeting with Nicole, and so then I just stayed in your office, and they wanted to know the same thing everybody wants to know: did your client ever meet with Shohei Ohtani? And and I just reiterated what I've said 1,000 times: never met him, never spoke to him, never texted, emailed, had no contact whatsoever. And there was other information that they wanted, but I couldn't give them. I reached out to, the U.S. attorney at the
Right.
time and said, is it okay if I give them, for instance, the information from your website?
Right.
And they said, well, if we get it from any source other than pursuant to your agreement, all bets are off.
Right.
And so I had to say, sorry, I can't give it to you. But then what happened with the U.S. attorney was they called and they had access to everything. They had Matt's passwords. They had his computers. They had access to his gambling website. But what Matt did was he reached out to the servicer of his website and he got them a 268-page spreadsheet with the 19,000 bets that Ipe had made over a year and a half. And so we made their job much, much easier for them. And then what was also interesting was obviously one of the questions was, what time zone is the website on?
Right.
So that they could make sure, like you said, if Shohei's playing and somebody's placing a bet,
Correct.
they know it's not Shohei.
Right.
And you, again, have you said this in many interviews? I have never seen the U.S. Attorney's Office go to the grand jury and get an indictment that quickly. I mean, they'll file a complaint, like they catch somebody doing something and they'll file a complaint and then they go to the grand jury. But this was a grand jury indictment and they did it within 3 weeks. So it was amazing how they went from not interested at all to indicting Ipe.
Swiftly, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, 19,000 bets. It's like when he wasn't interpreting or on the field, he had to have been gambling. That is a lot of.
Think about that. So they said he averaged 26 bets a day, right? Which doesn't even sound like a lot, actually. It is a lot, but I meant like, it doesn't sound overwhelming. But the reality is that I would say probably half of the time he had an account with me, he didn't have access to credit because he owed me $24 million and couldn't bet until he made a payment. So really 26 is probably more like 50 bets a day.
So basically, these are big numbers, and I think this is worth pausing at. He paid you $16 million,
yeah.
but he still owed you
$24 million.
$24 million.
Yeah, which
of course you'll never collect. But
well, if I did, I would go to jail.
Exactly. But also,
Yeah, it's uncollectible anyway. Unless Shohei wants to send it. I mean, maybe the government will allow that. I don't know.
no. And we even asked them, like,
we did.
What do we do if he sends him money? He said, give it to us. And we were like,
No, I don't know if you remember. I had a client that actually wanted to pay. And at the time, I was so transparent with, well, I'm not going to say her name, but one of the prosecutors that you and I asked them if I could receive the money and give it to them towards my IRS balance. And they said, absolutely not. You can't receive another dollar.
no.
Which was rough because I have a person who actually wants to pay and I can't even collect the money, which, by the way, I was paying taxes on already because I had to file a correct return for 2023, which I'm still obligated to pay taxes on because it shows on my website that I made this money even though I didn't collect it, which is something I talk about in some podcasts. It's really frustrating because, they don't allow you, as you know, we contacted the IRS agent and asked him to give us factual numbers of because I had no idea what my income was.
Right, because they took everything. They took Matt's computers. They shut down the website.
Yeah, they took everything from my home.
Yeah.
I still haven't got my electronics back.
And this is something a lot of people deal with. I'm sure you've heard this before. Like, hey, Diane, I have to file my taxes and I don't have my computer and I need my QuickBooks or whatever it is. And I mean, they don't know what you owe, and it's a problem.
Right.
People don't get, my kids, they took my kid's computer. They can't do their homework.
Yeah, how do you file a correct tax return when you don't know how much money you made?
Right.
It's not like I was a 1099 employee
Right.
or a W-2. So we were asking the IRS agent, listen, we're just trying to do the right thing here. And he's like, I'm not telling you what to put down on your taxes.
Yep. We're like, hey, we don't want to file another false tax return.
Correct.
We don't want to get in trouble again. We don't want to violate probation.
Correct.
Help us. And he basically said, I can't, which was
Frustrating.
he told me he would.
Yeah, which he did.
But then when you spoke to him, he said,
did,
I
yeah.
can't.
Yeah.
So
he would not. I'm sure he didn't want to be responsible for giving us a number, and then
right.
We'd just say, hey.
Did he ever win? So if every 10 bets,
he won $4.4 million in 1 week.
4.4.
That's the most I ever saw him win. But let me remind you that he owed so much money; it was just coming off a balance. So I mean, I paid him before, but
let me ask you, as a bookie, would you congratulate him? Like, dude, you're having a great
absolutely.
week.
Truly.
Yeah.
Now,
what if you actually had to pay out $4 million?
I still would congratulate him because I would know it's coming back.
You would know it's coming back.
Yeah.
You write about that in the book. It's the long game,
right?
And it's when someone wins big, your ability to pay fast and on time, that speed that shows the credibility. But even when we were like, great job,
yeah,
you had a great week,
for sure.
I'm happy for you.
Mm-hmm.
And when you respond and just be like, thank you, I'm on a roll. I'm gonna
listen. I can tell you in my book. I don't know if you recall, I flew to Nicole and I flew to New York to meet a client. I was paying him $2.2 million, which I brought 200 and something thousand in cash on the plane. And I brought the money over there, and then I was wiring him the difference. And by the time I landed in New York, he had already lost the $2 million back.
Oh my God.
So I gave him the 200 and something thousand in cash. And so I didn't have to send the wire, which is fantastic,
Did
of
you
course.
get stopped at security?
Not this time.
With the 200,000?
Not this particular time, but many times I have, yes.
you're not allowed to travel with that much.
You actually can in the U.S.
It's the metal in the bills that goes off. It sets off.
But
the
I
metal
thought
detector.
you'd be allowed to travel.
You are. It's when you leave U.S. Customs.
That's what I thought.
That's
like
when you
you
have
were
to
coming
declare.
back from Jamaica, and you and
Correct.
Nicole thought it would be fun to
Bahamas.
spend some
Yeah.
Bahamas in a Bahamian prison. You thought that was
correct.
fun.
Correct. And I got
Read the book to learn more about that experience.
That's the best story I've
Matt
ever
is
heard.
going to be in a different prison, thankfully. You're not going to, you have something to compare it to.
That one was wow.
We should try to get him credit for those 2 days in that jail
my
for your
God.
prison sentence.
Well, when have you guys seen the El Salvador prison?
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Am I saying this right? I've got it.
Bahamian?
Yeah, I got a lot of crap for this. Bohemian?
Yes.
Bahamian.
Yeah, so I said Bohemian.
Oh.
And if you go look at all the comments on my soft white underbelly,
Oh, yeah.
I've gotten blasted for that. I was like, sorry, I'm just a white guy here in Orange County. I said it wrong. It's Bahamian, right?
Bahamian, yes.
Bahamian. So anyway,
Anyway.
in a Bahamian prison, El Salvador looks much worse. I will
Yes.
say that.
Well, thank God for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was really bad, and that experience was rough. I don't think Lompoc will be nearly as bad.
No.
And a little bit more about eBay as we transition. What was he betting on?
Soccer, almost 80% of soccer.
Like Major League Soccer?
No, Justin, I can't even tell you the countries because I never heard of them in my life. Truly. I mean, of course, he would bet on a turkey. In fact, I put in my book exactly what he bet on the first bet. It was a Istanbul soccer game, which we know people have heard of Istanbul, but if I could tell you some of the countries I've never heard of in my life.
And do you have to totally remove yourself from what they're doing? It's not your job to judge. You figure he's got some rationale for investing or betting on these games. Do you ever say to him, like, but why this?
No, because
It's not in your interest?
Well, how does a person like myself who's lost millions on millions of dollars gambling on the wildest things as well? I mean, I'd have to question.
You lose on
myself.
the NFL and the NBA. Maybe he's onto something.
Sadly, I've bet on the WNBA before because there was nothing else on. So I'm guilty of the same issue. So it's hard to judge somebody when you're also that guy. I've also been the guy who has had $2 million in a casino and I had 20 grand left and I'm hitting the credit card machine, getting cash advances to continue to gamble. So it's hard for me to even question even ePay.
Mm-hmm.
And let me just say, I have never even put a quarter in a slot machine in my entire life. I've learned so much
about gambling.
And I don't understand, the details of how to gamble, but
Right.
just as far as your world and how you operated your business,
Right.
fascinating. Absolutely fascinating.
Truthfully, I could say this now that it's after sentencing. It is the easiest business if it's ran properly in the world.
But it's also, of course, high
But
risk.
it's the most complicated business too at the same time.
Well, what people don't understand is that you were the bank. You weren't placing bets for people in Las Vegas.
Correct.
They were betting you.
I was the casino.
You
I was
were
the
the
house.
casino.
Yes.
Exactly. And that's something that took me a little while to comprehend.
Yeah, I took
Like,
all the
how
risk
did
and all
that
the
work?
exposure
Yeah.
in doing that, which of course is why I made so much money because the exposure worked out in my favor
Right.
over time, as Justin said. But the more clients I had, the less exposure I had. Which
and keeping
sounds,
all of those balls in the air all the time. I mean, obviously your website helped you with that, but
oh yeah,
it's a lot of information, and you had all of it in your head.
I mean the website helped, but I was moving $5 to $7 million every Monday throughout the world. You know, I should say mostly in the U.S.
Isn't that crazy?
You know, that's the hardest. That was the hardest part. Is like, how do you have? I always describe how do you have a guy in Kansas that you owe 17,000 to, and you need to get him on Monday or Tuesday 17 grand, and he's in the middle of Wichita.
Right.
That's a difficult
I
task.
have a question for you,
Yeah.
or a statement that you can confirm. You've paid every single one of your debts.
With clients, yes, I still owe some bookmakers to this day.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Well, so karma. Right?
Well, no, I'll pay them actually.
No, but I mean,
Yeah.
they paid, you know,
Those
people owe you
people,
money,
I had such
them
good
money.
relationships. They see what I'm going through.
Yeah.
I'll pay every one of my debts, but I have put a few on a back burner, no question, because in the middle of this process, Damien being one of them, being transparent, I was betting with him. And then when you get rated and everything's shut down,
Yeah.
you have to put those people on hold because the money, not only was it taken from me, but I don't have it anymore. So,
Well, and that was
income.
something as your lawyer I was really nervous about because I didn't know what you were doing behind the scenes.
Sure.
You know, and I just kept telling you over and over, you can't take any more money, you can't accept any more money, and you kept saying, but I have bills to pay, and I kept saying, I don't care that you have bills to pay.
Right.
You know, sell your wine collection, whatever you have to do, but don't accept any more money.
Right.
And you know, whether you did or not, I don't know. I don't want to know, but you know, it was. Look, we walked a tightrope a lot of the time during that 2 years of our relationship. There were a lot of things that you did that I told you not to do, and a lot of things that you did I didn't know you were doing, like talking to Tisha Thompson.
That's correct.
You know, but yeah, I mean, I understand you have to pay your bills. I understand you have 5 children,
Right.
and a wife and a home, and you know, a lot of.
To answer your, or to reply to your statement, what I had to do was tell myself she has a job to do, which is to protect me. Her job is to be a father, be home for my family.
Right.
And I love and respect that. And you did the best plausible outcome times 1,000. So I'll never forget that. But I also had to tell myself, how do I define success that's best for my situation? And I'll just take everything you're saying, and if there's a few things I got to push back on, whether you know it or not, I'm going to do that, because at the end of the day, I'm the one who has to walk out of that prison or home confinement or whatever happened and face 5 kids and all the
Right.
ancillary
You
problems.
have to keep a roof over there.
Yeah, so I did the best I could, and because of what you did, I feel like it was the best combination possible, considering the situation I was in.
I smiled at Justin when you said that, because how do you define success?
Well, that sounds like something Michael Santos would
It's
say.
something Michael Santos. I mean, I heard him say that very first time.
It's actually one of the best statements you could really make to anyone in life.
Yep.
Because everyone has different ideas of what that is. You know, like a person could play tennis every day, and that's something that they, you know, it's just a really weird example. And that could be like the home run, the grand slam of their life. I enjoy playing tennis, but I don't want to play every day. And that's not exactly what I'm looking to do. But yet they're the happiest person they've ever been, you know? And some people want a Ferrari, and that makes them fulfilled, right? Everyone has a different cup to fulfill. Personally, as soon as you figure that out, whoever you are, you're on your way to living a great life, because that's the hardest part.
Let's talk about living differently. So the first time I met Matt, he came to my club. I think you had the blue Rolls Royce. And then the next
Blue one. I only saw a gold one.
was it
Well, it was Tempest gray, but blue, Dodger blue interior, which, you know, the ego part of me, by the way, misses that very much. I want to make that clear.
and then the next time you
Yeah, I told you this. Let me just interrupt.
Okay.
This is really funny, because when I came to your house the first time, I saw this gold Rolls Royce SUV in the driveway, and I walked in and I said, "You're going to have to downgrade your lifestyle, because the judge is going to know every single thing about you from the probation report, and he's going to know what you drive. So you need to downgrade." So he sold the Rolls Royce and he got a Range Rover, which you're saying, "Oh, but it was only 60,000. It was used." I'm like, dude, it's a Range Rover.
what did you expect him to what did you want him to roll in?
I mean, look, I heard Judge Selna once yelling at somebody because she was driving a Mercedes and she owed victims money. So, you know, a Honda Civic probably would have been a good choice.
Maybe you're right, but I paid my restitution and I have
But
no
you
victims.
did. You
so at
did.
least I
You
can also be a lawyer back your way.
But I
This is a
wanted
very funny story.
I may not have the
I do
bar
want to
exam
talk about
passed.
the canceling the country clubs, the downsizing, the from private jets to coach Walk us. That's an adjustment.
It was.
Help us understand. And you're still adjusting through it now.
Yeah, I mean, listen, from an outside normal person perspective, they're going to look at this conversation.
Yeah, they'll have very little sympathy for you.
Yeah, and I'm not. I'm answering your question, and I'm very clear. I'm not asking for any sympathy.
Yeah.
I'm not a victim. I lived an amazing life. I took advantage of something, and I'm paying the time for my crime. So let me say that first and foremost. But to answer your question, yeah, I miss private jets. I miss first class. I miss exotic things. I mean,
Those were gifts from the casinos, weren't they?
not all of them, but some, yes.
Well, you also told me
The
first-
attention. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
ahead.
No, the attention, right, of walking into the casino
Yeah.
and having people.
I have an ego.
I gambled with him one time, and it's like the catering. It's not even VIP. It's like it's really beyond VIP.
It is.
Okay, wait. We need to cut that because you can't say you gambled with him.
Why? He hadn't pled guilty
Yeah,
yet.
this is way before all of that.
This was pre-trial.
Yeah, he hadn't. No. I don't mind saying this. You had him call me like days after getting raided, and he called, and I'm.
Before he was charged.
Yeah,
he hadn't.
they had raided him.
Oh, he
It
wasn't
was-
on pre-trial supervision yet.
No, well, way before.
Once I was told I couldn't gamble,
Right.
then I stopped
Okay.
gambling.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I was actually, and this is all public knowledge, I was actually barred from every casino at one point anyway. So I couldn't even gamble if I wanted to.
I want to talk about Monaco too. Don't forget.
Yeah.
But anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Anyway, I was just saying it was an adjustment.
Yes.
just-
beyond.
Yes.
And again, when we flew coach, Nicole and I were like, which is a really her rich people's problem. Let's be honest. We were like, man, this sucks, because we got so spoiled of living this amazing, luxurious lifestyle. But there's a guy sitting on a couch right now who works at a air conditioning company, and he's laughing at me because he's not leaving his kids. He's not going to prison, and he can make fun of me for saying, "Oh, I didn't fly a private jet." I don't blame him. So I'm paying for my problem, but I'm just being open about the reality of life. I was enjoying all those things. I have a big ego. I enjoyed getting in a Rolls Royce that has shag carpet that's this big, where your feet feel like you're in the sand at the Laguna Beach, or getting on a jet where you have literally caviar and a bowl of fruit and Dom Perignon sitting there, and then you can be in Las Vegas in 40 minutes. When I literally called 2 hours ago because I decided, just sitting here with you guys, that I'd like to go to Vegas in 2 hours. And the plane was sitting at the private airport literally in an hour from now.
Yeah.
So those things I miss. But then I don't miss the nights where I can't sleep and I owe $2 million and I got to come home and go borrow money from my friends and whatever, because I had a bad week in my business and I just lost $2 million to the wind or wherever. And there's a lot of sleepless nights that people don't understand, the exposure and the stress I put myself under. And now the aftermath of all of that, which is sitting here today, knowing 35 days, I won't be able to golf with you anymore. I can't take her to dinner. I can't pick up my son from school. So that's the message. I mean, you have to think, as you say, 10, 10, 10. I mean, you got to think about all these decisions, how they affect you further on down the road. And I wasn't.
So the first time I met you, you said, I always knew that this was going to come to an end.
I felt it. I did.
And so you said you just enjoyed it while you had it. You took advantage of all of it. The private jets and the concerts and the tickets and the box seats.
Sure.
And you loved every minute of it, but you always knew that it was going to come to an end. And I thought that was very kind of enlightened of you and Zen. And it was, made it so easy to work with you in a way, among every other thing that made it easy to work with you. But because you accepted your fate right from day one.
It was a relief though, too, in a weird way. We talked about this earlier, when I finally have that, but now I don't have to worry about, is the FBI going to raid or knock down my door at 5 a.m.? Am I dealing with the aftermath? But once I'm through this, I don't have to worry about, am I going to prison again unless I do something absolutely stupid, which I have never done in my life, right? Other than take bets. I've never committed any other crimes. I've never hurt anybody. I've never, done anything where I'm going to possibly go to prison. This is the first time. It's been going on quite some time, but the point is, we won't be revisiting this possibility, and that's going to feel free in itself. I mean, because you've been there. How do you feel every day? You get to go and live freely and talk about your past, and people respect you because you're honest and open about it, and I feel no different.
What happens is you come home for a while, at least for me, you're afraid to almost do anything.
I can imagine.
Even when I came home, I had a chance to invest in a couple of buildings. I could raise some money that I knew I could have. And I'm like, I'm on probation. I was just in prison for a fraud-related crime. I could probably go out and raise 300 and get a little piece of it. But if it goes south, I can see the message now. Dude out of jail raises I'm like, you know what? I'm good.
Right.
So it takes some time to like get back in. But now.
Let me ask you a question about that. So it's funny because I believe that for the rest of my life, I truly believe that I will always be worried about some of the decisions I make, even if they're all legal, and worry about the implications of everything 10 times more. And you just said it, you pretty much did it first, especially, right? Do you even think about that to this day?
With everything I do, there's no doubt. When I was sued civilly from someone who was in my case, who luckily didn't get charged and decided to sue me thinking he can come and do a quick payday, the civil lawsuit says Justin Paperny, a convicted felon, right? That's just the messaging. It's all us. It will be the same thing with you, convicted criminal and bookmaker.
Yeah, it adds to the flavor of the
Sure.
lawsuit. Right?
And there's what I have found and what you're learning is the more you talk about it and what you've learned, people will come to say like, this is kind of an asset for you. Like, I want to work with you now more than this.
Right.
I look at events I've had or people who are in my life, it's because I've been able to show, hey, this is really a lot of pain that I created, but a lot of benefits from the experience. And I think you've been able to show that through your writing and leading as an example, rather than a lot of people who just don't really do anything. That's part of the reason you got the outcome, because you had 2 years to build a really good record. And it wasn't like make-believe. There are things you actually did that Diane could cite and reference and defend, and the judge commented on it. You had a long time to do it. Right. A lot of people wait 2 years to get sentenced, but they just watch TV all day and they would never go sell turf or things that you began to do. That would be like beneath them. Right. So I'm going to sit at home and do nothing.
Well, people laughed at me when they asked me, what are you doing for work? I'm like, I sell front and backyard grass under, fake grass. But I will comment that one of the great things that my attorney did was ask me to hire a company called White Collar Advice. And, that led me to you. Not only are we great friends, but you actually helped me. Your team really helped me with my mindset of kind of. I think this is important because even though a lot of people, you've said this, a lot of people can kind of go and figure this out on their own or try to do the work that your team does. Going and writing their own character letters or whatever. All the things that you do. I believe that the stress of not having to worry about that. And allowing your team to kind of come to me and say, okay, this is what we need. These are things you got to do. I'm grateful for her because doing that really allowed me to focus on what was more important to me, which is building my new brand, writing my book, diving into my family, accepting responsibility, and then even working with prison professors and all the abilities I had to kind of push these concerns aside. Because trying to figure that out on your own.
Well, one thing you did, and you were very receptive to feedback. So sometimes it would be like 9 or 10 o'clock and I would film an audio message and I would send it to you and Nicole.
Yeah.
And Nicole would always respond so kindly, like, oh, you're so good at this. And I'm like, well, I've been doing it 16 years. But I would hear something that you would say. And I'd say, dude, I love that you're trying. I would try to do it this way.
Yeah.
And if there's one thing he can take is really direct
criticism.
Yes, because it makes you better. And I said, my way may be different. Like there are things that I do that you may disagree with and vice versa. Diane mentioned your sentencing. She told Judge Holcomb he doesn't agree with everything, or I'll follow all of my advice, and everyone chuckled. But you were easy to give feedback to. He starts to film videos. He's like, dude, does this suck? Is this good? I'd say, I would do it again. Here's why, and you would, and it just gets better.
Right.
So you were like willing to try, I guess, and rebuild. And it's very, very difficult, especially with 5 kids, man. It's not easy.
Especially at 50 when you don't even know what the heck social media is and you're grabbing a phone, you feel like a complete idiot.
We should talk about that and how you, as part of recreating yourself, essentially, or recalibrating, the title of your book, you started doing social media and
against your will.
You started doing media and you started doing interviews. And I explicitly told you repeatedly not to do this.
You did.
And you said, I have to make a living. I have to do what I have to do to start fresh. And I told you how the judge would perceive this and that it would work against you and that it could hurt you and you could do more time because of it. and you completely understood, and you said, but I have to do this.
Right.
And there were 4 articles mentioned in the government sentencing memo, newspaper articles that you had done interviews that I didn't even know about.
Sure.
That was the first time I saw them. One of them, I guess, the other AOSA had mentioned to me, the New York
U.S.
Post
Post or New York.
and of all,
I called you after that.
Yes.
I was
Yes.
pissed off.
Yeah.
I was furious. And even
Well,
he
Craig called
commented-
me. Craig, he's like, I just got off my radio show. I'm pissed off at you and your boy. I'm like, Craig, he's 50. He's got kids. He's not going to listen to everything I do.
And of all the newspapers to go live on, it was the New York Post. I
Right.
mean, we knew ESPN wanted to do your first interview. Forbes wanted to do your first interview.
Right.
And let's just be clear. So when the story broke about Ipe and Shohei, my phone blew up. You had reporters in your driveway.
Correct.
I had calls from every single news media outlet. I spoke with so many reporters. I did a couple of interviews, and all I ever said was he never met Shohei Ohtani, et cetera,
Right.
et cetera.
Real basic.
But I mean, we spoke with the Forbes guy. He really wanted to do an exclusive. Of course, Tisha Thompson wanted to do an exclusive. And I mean, what I found out after the fact was that you had actually already done these interviews and they were ready to go live right after sentencing. But I didn't know about most of it. And I yelled at you about the couple of things that I saw. There were some, you're very active on Instagram, and I've seen a couple of videos where you said things, and I was like, you're such an idiot. And I mean, I'm a professional. I shouldn't talk to my clients that way.
No, but we had a little bit more of a serious relationship at this point.
Well, no, I mean,
Friendship.
Yes. I mean, we have become friends during this process. And so and of course, like Justin said, you take feedback really well, and you were like, I understand and I agree with you. And you would call me and say, I did something really stupid.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I'd
because
say,
I knew you were going to yell.
Here's
at me.
what he did. So you two have like some of your values were competing. You, of course, want to get him home.
I want to keep him out of prison.
But knowing him as we were developing our friendship and working together, like even if someone said to him before Friday, or someone said 2 years ago, okay, you're going to build this brand and you're going to write a book and do all this stuff, and you're going to get 2 years. But if you don't do any of it, you're going to get home confined. He'd have taken the 2 years because you have to, the hardest part is coming home, starting over. You're not starting over with anything because you have this book and you're developing and building. You have more than most dudes. I mean, by virtue of your work. But that's why it was kind of, you were at odds a little bit. And there were times he would call me and say, Diane wouldn't be
What would he say, Justin?
I don't think Diane, well, he was doing so much, he's learning.
Yes.
So when you start doing media and talking, you haven't honed the message.
Right.
Yeah,
You're
you
practicing,
definitely
you're
are
learning.
as you go.
When I came home, I would speak to like 20 students at Long Beach State. It didn't matter if it went bad or if I didn't fully accept responsibility. Sometimes I was too serious. Then one professor's like, you're too funny. We can't invite you back. This is crime. I'm like, okay, lighten it up a little bit. Then they're like, you're too serious. I had years to learn.
Yeah, fine tune it.
Yes, before I was doing TV and stuff like that. You went like right into it with a message you had to learn as you went. So naturally you're going to make some mistakes. But sometimes he'd say things, then he'd say, I just don't want Diane to see what I just did.
Well, you told me you're going to be really mad at me. You're not going to like what I said.
You're probably seeing some of it now.
Since Friday, I have watched a few of the interviews that you did, and there were a few things that you said that made me cringe.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But I also told you this the other day, that I have such a different perspective of who you are, because I knew you, as I said, like I met you in your kitchen.
Right.
Right. And Nicole was there, and Kingston was grabbing her boob, and your father-in-law was there.
Right.
And so I know you as Matt.
Right.
But you had a public persona.
Sure.
And I'm starting to get a perspective of what that is. And it's been very, very, very interesting.
Right.
Just kind of to see you from the outside for the first time after 2 years.
Well, I think you probably are understanding now why I would push back a little bit in some areas.
I always understood. I mean,
Yeah.
you need to make a living. You
Right.
need to support your family. And, you have a mind of your own. Clearly, nobody can control Matt Bowyer. I said this to, I think, Justin. You're kind of like, this is actually what Carol said about Michael Santos when he was in prison. He was like a jet engine without wheels. And that's exactly what you're like.
Well, he's right. He's an individual. He'll take advice and feedback, but you're going to pursue your own path, and you'd be willing to kind of endure some of the consequences. You're willing to try, but it turned out fine. But there are some things that could have gone a little bit differently.
For sure.
And the judge could have perhaps looked at some of the things that were out there, like on social media. We have a mutual friend, somebody that Matt knows from high school, who's a criminal defense attorney. And she would text me every once in a while saying, did you see Matt's social media post? Oh my God, he needs to take this down. So I would look and I'd be like, all right, and
another thing that could have helped, I've heard that story, was because maybe he was producing so much, some of it gets lost. You just can't see everything.
Oh, so I didn't see
there's 1,000 pieces, maybe 2 or 3.
Well, especially when social media or news outlets take only a piece of what you say.
A little snippet, sure.
And it looks really bad. And what about the next sentence?
Oh, yeah.
What about, hey, I gambled $40 million in the last 10 years. And the next sentence is, and I wish I never did $1, and I hope someone learns from this. And guess what? I lost most of it back, and it wasn't worth it. I mean, there could be so many things after that aren't even put in the piece.
Exactly.
And the media is great at that. Of course.
And as you spend a lot of time preparing your sound bites, your talking points, because you know that the media is going to be present. And you have no idea which of those points the media is going to pick up on or play. And you spoke for a very long time after sentencing. They played maybe 10 seconds of it.
Right.
Same with me. In fact, I said, we send far too many people to prison in this country, and I don't think sending Matt to prison serves any purpose. And all NBC published was, it doesn't serve any purpose.
Right.
So, I mean,
they cut it
and they only have so many seconds or so many minutes to run a story. And they obviously had an interview that you had done before sentencing that they were holding on to. So it's been a very interesting process learning about how to negotiate with the media. I mean, you've learned more than I have at this point, but
I think you've learned a lot too.
I learned a ton. Like now I know anytime I'm talking to anybody from the media, the very first thing I say to them is, this is off the record. Until we figure out what you're going to ask me. No, because there was the guy from, was it Washington Post?
Oh, yeah.
And he was like, I said, you I didn't tell you could publish that. Well, you didn't say off the record. I said, yeah, I did. He goes, oh, but you said it after the fact.
Yeah, they don't care.
No, they don't care. They just want their story.
Yeah, at all costs.
I would say you've been consistent amongst the interviews. If people were to watch these podcasts, there isn't hypocrisy. You're consistent. You know what you're saying.
And I have to say,
thanks to you, I've learned a lot of learning and fine-tuning it. I mean, sorry to cut you off, but my story it's always the same, just like what happened in your story or even in your life, your story. We all know what that is. But the problem is, for me, I have so much that happened in the last 30 years, and I'm telling this long-winded story that sometimes I'm like, was it 800,000 or was 900,000? And then you don't want to say in one, because they'll pick you apart. If you say in one podcast it was 800,000 and the next one it's 9, oh, now he's lying. And it's like, no, I'm going to give you an example. This, because I've been getting blasted on certain things. Dyeing my beard, that's one, which is fine. The 8 red dots on my chest. Wow, have I gotten hit on that one.
Because you said different numbers?
No. When my recollection of the federal agents coming to my home, I know they had guns drawn because I saw it with my own eyes, but I described it as 8 red dots were on my chest. Okay. And then I had all these people on the media or social media saying I was an FBI agent. We don't use red dots. We haven't in the last 10 years. That's a lie. He's lying. There's no way it was in the middle of the daytime. There's no way you could even see the 8 red dots. And I had to reply back. I'm like, listen, you might be right. Maybe there wasn't 8 red dots. That was my recollection of what occurred. I was in a fog. I can promise you there were 8 agents with guns pointed at me as I was putting my son in the car. That I can guarantee you. If there weren't 8 dots, fine. So we would argue because these people just love that, right? And then I say, fine, let's just call it muskets, okay? There was 8 muskets and they had Indian, I mean, it's like, what are you arguing about? But my point is, as I learned, I was like, I have to make sure that I say exactly the
same thing.
Yeah, because again, it's not like I'm trying to not tell the truth. It's just those little nuances.
But you're also allowed to see it differently. That's like time immemorial. You think back, you reflect back. Your first day in prison will be not as bad as you'll think. It's exciting in some crazy ways because at least you're getting credit for time served.
And you're adapting to your environment.
It goes very
new experience.
It's emotional. It goes very quickly, right? Like, wow, I'm surrendering to prison. But just like that, the day is over.
Right.
But you'll describe that first day in prison differently the first day than you will the 30th day, and you're going to get some facts wrong.
Right.
Like we're parents. I use the analogy when Alyssa was born and I'm holding her, I'm thinking like, geez, just don't drop her, you know? But now I describe it as one of the greatest days of my life. But holding her, is she healthy? What are the signs? It was not as enjoyable as you would think.
Of course.
You can describe it differently, and you're going to get things, you're going to describe it differently in time.
Yeah.
And there will always be people that will nitpick. I mean, who cares?
Yeah.
It's so irrelevant.
Sadly, I let some of it bother me, but on the
human.
Wait a while. Yeah, you have more to go.
I've gotten like, I don't know, 600 and something comments, and I think I've commented back on all of them already within a few days. And these people are just like enamored the fact that I spent the time to do that. And I'm like, well, I don't sleep, so I might as well just, spend my time reporting to haters, which is really funny. But it's you argue with these people that you really hate their own lives, and they're in a basement and they're overweight and they're unhealthy or whatever their problems are, and they're just projecting because they see people that they can make fun of or blast and enjoy. So it's a hard. I mean, Tom Brady gets hate.
Yeah.
What's the name? Brad Pitt does.
I mean, you put yourself out there, you're going to
you're going to get.
There's a cost to it. You have to expect it for sure.
Yes.
Well,
all I can say is there's more to come. Especially if there's documentaries and movies and you're
only going to get worse.
profiting off your crime, and
Sure.
people will say exactly what the prosecutor tried to argue, that you were exploiting essentially like poor people. And I thought you did a good job of arguing that people go to Vegas and lose money. These were willing people betting. These are executives. I know. I thought the prosecutor was reaching there too, truth be told.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Yeah. It was very frustrating because she took everything and just, to some extent she made assumptions about Matt, and, I corrected those assumptions, and she was fine with, if she was factually incorrect, she was happy to be corrected. But then just the way she tried to spin things, it was just, I don't know. I just felt like it was gratuitous at this point. Here we have this guy who's done everything that you want a defendant to do. And he's paid $1.6 million in restitution. He has 200 people in the courthouse who are here to support him. And she said, well, they were part of his life before, while he was committing the crime.
Right.
And my point was, yes, but they're still in his life. And most people don't have 200 people show up in court. Most people have maybe 2 or 3 or 5. I mean, you've been to more sentencing hearings.
That's all I did when I came home, because I had nothing else to do. I would sit there for 8-9 hours a day.
Right. I mean, I've done hundreds of sentencing hearings in federal court, but you're kind of wrapped up in the moment, not necessarily looking at how many people are in the courtroom. But you are an extraordinary example of exactly what you should do when you're in this situation, apart from some of the interviews and some of the social media. But everything else, you did community service, you went to therapy, you did Gamblers Anonymous, you worked on your narrative, you worked on your story, and you completely accepted responsibility.
But I learned that from you guys both. I mean, truly, which is really important to anyone watching this. If you're ever in a case of any sort, state, federal, doesn't matter, you need to seek good advice and get great help. I mean, Justin taught me this. I didn't have to with you, but I hear him with other clients. You got to hold your lawyer accountable. A lot of people don't do that. And I could see why. They're scared. They're nervous. They don't know that. I didn't have to with you ever. I mean, it was quite the opposite. But other people have to make sure, because lawyers aren't always doing their job either, or following through, or I mean, most are, but I meant in general.
Busy.
Well, we've begun working with several people who have found Matt on social media, and he connects them to us, and we form these great relationships. And I think in 2 of the scenarios, they've already fired and hired a new lawyer, because if you go through it once, you don't really know the questions to ask.
Right.
How would you know how to hold a lawyer accountable if you've never done it? So then they speak to Matt, and Matt will be like, well, Diane did this. I'll be like, oh, my lawyer didn't do that. Oh, well, Diane did that. How come my lawyer didn't do that? So you begin to ask better questions, and then you realize I'm not really getting the right guidance. So he's been helpful in pointing people in our direction to get guidance.
Look, Justin, you and I have recently had a conversation about a very high profile case, and this person had their probation interview and they weren't prepared for it. And it's shocking because they probably paid their lawyers $1 million or more, and they weren't prepared for probation. And this is something actually I learned from Michael Santos, I don't know, 10 years ago? Is that when he got out of prison?
He got out in 2013.
So 12 years ago, I met Michael Santos, who spent 26 years in federal prison. And he wanted to work with me on mitigation with my client. And of course, my first reaction was, I'm good. I'm great at sentencing. I don't need any help. Thank you very much. But I love hearing your story. And he said, well, you know what? Give me a shot. So I said, okay. And the responses and the results that I got as a result of having Michael write my clients' narratives for them was extraordinary. And so I've been referring every one of my clients to you guys ever since then, if they can afford to hire you.
Or that we give all of as much as we can away for free.
And I tell them that too. I say they have tons of free
Yes.
content. You can go to their websites, but if you can afford to hire them, I highly recommend that you hire them. I think the most important thing that I learned from Michael Santos was how the PSR follows you. It's not only how important it is for sentencing.
Yes.
But first of all, how important it is to be thoroughly prepared before you walk in. So a probation interview involves the probation officer asking you questions about every aspect of your life. Education, employment, family, upbringing, money, every single thing. And most people just walk in and let the probation officer do all the work. I learned from Michael that I have to have my client completely and thoroughly prepared and give all of that information to probation before we even walk in the door.
Right. Because if they don't do that, then the probation officer is going to default to the press release or the plea agreement, the government's version of events. So somehow you have to work to influence that. And writing is a good way to do that. To that high profile case, yes, it's incredible how few people, like even at that level of an expense of a lawyer, don't know how to challenge the PSR and don't understand how one word could lead to not getting a program or the right prison, email access,
medical care,
everything.
I mean, that's one thing I learned. Actually, I had a client, this I learned from somebody from the BOP at one of these conferences that we attend. And I went up to him and I said, my client needs a sleep apnea machine, CPAP machine. And he said, just make sure it's in the PSR, because if it's not in the PSR, he won't get it. And so that was something I learned from that guy. But not only is it critically important to have all of the information to the probation officer prior to the probation interview, but how the probation report is also important when you're in prison and when you're on probation after you get out of prison. And that stuff I had no idea.
Yeah, they call it the Bible in prison for a reason. In sentencing hearings, I think Judge Holcomb referenced the PSR. Did you review it? Do you understand it? It's important not just through sentencing. And most defendants post-sentence don't have the communication with their lawyer because they're moving to a different phase of the journey.
Right.
And they don't understand how, like you said, it would influence them in prison and supervised release.
Right. So we only understand what happens up to sentencing and then up to maybe your surrender.
Right.
But at that point, then, you know, even if we keep in touch with our clients afterwards and, you know, check in and say, how are you doing? We still don't know the specific details of how the PSR impacted them while they were in prison, or and how they're treated when they're on supervision, how they're treated when they're in prison, and how they're treated when they get home.
It's an important. He was well prepared for it. He was able to get. I think the report was fair. Anytime you get a recommendation back below the guidelines, that's good, because I would argue most probation officers err on the side of caution and just come back with a guideline recommendation. I'd say like 99% of the time. So that was a very good like first data point, that if the guidelines were 41 to 51, you got 36, and that didn't reflect the 1.6 you were paying back. That's when you know you're trending in a really good direction. And then, I mean, we could always wonder what would have happened had you waited to get sentenced, but maybe you get 6 months home confinement. It won't matter because you'll be home from prison by then and moving on.
Right.
That was the right choice. I remember discussing that with you, and you just said, I'm ready. And the AUSA didn't want him to. Is that right?
No, she was fine. So what happened in the interim was that the U.S. attorney for the Central District of California changed with the administration. And a lot of the lawyers from the office left.
Right.
So we didn't have a U.S. attorney for a little bit of time. And finally, I had a case with another chief of another division, the narcotics division. And I said, hey, I've got this case. I need to talk to somebody. Can you help me out? So he introduced me to Kristen Williams, who was the chief of the fraud division. And so Kristen just took the case and ran with it. And she was able to speak with the agent and the other, the attorney from the Department of Justice, who we first dealt with. She's in Washington, D.C., but they had conversations about everything that Matt had done over the course of the 2 years. And I said, you know, look, it's my understanding that it's still going to be a while before this case is concluded, and Matt really wants to get on with his life. We would like to advance the sentencing. And she said, all right, well, let me get back to you. And she got back to me relatively quickly, and she said, yeah, that's fine. When were you thinking? And we agreed on.
Kind of said right away. I mean, really.
Yeah, as soon as possible. I mean, we needed time to get all of the papers filed and everything. And so we were able to get it done. And yeah, I mean, it was, I explained to Matt over and over again, like, you know, that you're going to probably get time if we
by
go
going early.
And you said, I don't care. I can't live with this anymore. I want to move forward with
Right.
it. And I totally respect that. And I think that the judge mentioned that he respected it.
Yeah.
And she understood it. And we've advised them, like, look, he's here if you need him. He's not going to, just say screw you if you need
Right.
something from him after this. But Matt, I understand. And I think that you probably would have waited a long time.
I think so.
I mean, I have clients that have waited years. And every time I have to call them and say, hey, we have to continue another couple months, they're like, oh my God,
Yeah,
you're
the misery.
kidding. Oh no, again. And even if they act like it's okay with them and they're like, they have a really good attitude about it, I still know that it's just gnawing
Yeah, of
away
course
at
it
them the
is.
whole time.
My friend just waited 9 years. 9 years. And he went to prison for 4 months in Arizona.
Oh my God.
9 years of living through this, and
Well, and that's another thing that you and Michael talk about is that a lot of people think that putting off the sentencing or putting off the jail time is what they want to do because they don't want to face it. But
I say you only want to delay it if you're making decisions that help ensure you get a shorter sentence. So when people say,
Right.
like some guy, a very nice man called me back east, and he's like, my sentence was delayed like 6 months. Is that a good thing? I'm like, I don't know. Tell me what you do every day. And some people describe what they do. I'm like, it's a terrible thing. You need to get sentenced. You're not doing anything that leads to a shorter sentence. Or some people will say, I'm doing this, this, and this. I'm like, those are really good things. You're working, you're making money for your family, you're running
Right.
a business. Okay, maybe you're cooperating. That's going to lead to a shorter sentence. That's a really good thing. Extend it, right? But it's of no value when people just do absolutely nothing with the delay. They should just surrender to the marshals and get started.
Well, and how many people have said to you, I wish I had just turned myself in and gotten it over with?
A lot of people say that too. I think most defendants don't fully understand that there are things they can do to try to get like better outcomes. And many waste the time before sentencing. And they don't do what Matt did. I wrote about that in the newsletter. They're not creating and building something new. They're just sort of living in the shadows or like a cage, their man cave. They just don't really do anything with the time, which is
'Cause they're
why,
depressed.
yeah, I was depressed and I didn't take very good care of myself and I neglected my health and my family. And it's like, I did that for 3 years. That was harder than any day in a minimum security camp.
Right.
Right. So that was a challenge that he had when we have 5 kids, you're no longer making millions of dollars. Like that alone is an adjustment. And sometimes I've had a lot of wealthy people in our community, like Matt, say, I have that comparison. So it's different if you made very little money to begin with. It's like, okay, that's kind of where I'm going to start over again.
Right.
But when you've made that money and you're starting from scratch, it's hard not to think about what you had. Some days it can struggle to get out of bed with it. That's hard in itself. So a lot of people, it's just too much for them to bear. So they just don't do anything.
But
It's
there are a lot-
wasted time.
I'll tell you, as a criminal defense attorney, one of the most frustrating things is when I instruct or advise my clients and I say, you need to do these things. You need to, whether it's therapy, whether it's meetings, whether it's rehab, whether it's, volunteer work, writing your narrative, getting character letters, whatever it is that I recommend that they do, and they don't do it. And then they tie my hands.
Right.
So I can't get a great result for them.
So when I have direct talks with people at times, I'll say, you know what, dude, it's totally fine that you're doing that, but you should embrace that you are choosing to have a longer prison sentence. You are choosing to just really have this define the rest of your life. And that's what happens with so many people who serve time. You think of movies like guys like Shawshank, Red serves 20, 30 years, where Andy, I can't function in the modern world. But it's guys that serve short sentences. I saw in prison with Michael's guidance where he encouraged me. Like I adjusted in prison, like you're going to see a lot of guys. It was exercise like all day. You feel like you're an Olympic athlete. And exercising 5 or 6 hours a day isn't necessarily a great thing if you're going to come home, unless you're going to get paid to be an athlete when you come home, and I wasn't. So then you see guys waste their term on television and exercise, table games, pickleball, softball, bocce ball, soccer. And then they're into the term, they're freaked out.
Right.
Crazed with anxiety, like shutting down visits or coming back from a visit having fought with their wife because the wife's like, what the hell are you going to do when you come home? You owe $3 million in Medicare. You can no longer be a doctor. And it's like, then they kind of look back on their prison term and they're like, oh, I kind of wasted it. Then they look back when they were a defendant and they're like, I kind of wasted that window too. So now I've wasted 5 years of my life. What's next? And they become very concerned. Then they go to the halfway house in Hollywood. And I use this analogy. They send you to KFC, which is across the street from the golf course, if you don't have a job that's approved. And all those dudes wish they were back in prison. And it all starts with what they did when the feds raided his house. He said, I'm going to try to do better. But it's easier said than done.
Yeah.
It's
I'm
not
sure it is.
easy.
I'm
It's
sure
very,
it is.
it's very, It's very hard.
Well, yeah, I had a client call me after he got out of prison camp, and I said, "How was it?" And he said, "Well, I mean, as good as it could have been under the circumstances." I think he went to Taft when Taft was still open.
That was my home. That was my home for a
Yeah,
while.
and he was like, "Yeah, you work out. It's kind of like a vacation. You don't have to worry about anything, but you also don't want to waste however many months of your life.
Yeah,
You
your
want to
time.
be proactive, and and I know that you will be
Sure.
successful at serving time." But yeah, it's something I think that it would be overwhelming to me. I'd be terrified.
It's an overwhelming experience if you're not prepared for it. What's more overwhelming is coming home and really worried about what you're going to do, which is why I said earlier, even if someone said, "Hey, if you do all of this work, you're going to get an extra 12 months, he'd say, "I have to do it because I'm 50 with a family." And
You have to have a jump on things.
yeah, and also even with changes in the BOP, I mean, even a year and a day isn't a year a day when I was in prison. So you volunteer with prison professors. Michael runs the nonprofit. He's going back to DC next week to meet with the BOP. Reforms have already been passed. We think more are coming with their advocacy. But like when I served an 18-month sentence, I served 13 months in prison. Now in 18 months with good planning, good building, credits, you go directly home. It could be like 5 or 6 months. It's fundamentally different. So the gap it's not as significant getting 18 months or 2 or 3 or even 4 years now compared to when I was in prison. You did much more time.
Yes.
So, and he knew all of that. The First Step Act had already passed when you were indicted and you pled guilty. And we used to walk through scenarios. You'd be like, all right, 37 months, the judge referenced the drug program. You don't need to do it.
Right.
But 37 months, you'd have done 10 months. 24 months, you'd have done 10 months. Right? It was very good planning, which meant it was worth the risk for you to do some things that would keep Diane up at night, like a New York Post interview.
I did that very well.
You did. But I will say also, you talk about people playing soccer and just working out the whole time that they're in prison. And that was something that I said to Judge Holcomb during sentencing, is that just doesn't serve any purpose.
Well, it doesn't have to be that way. A lot of people do that. I know he'll be productive. He'll be writing. The problem with some of the sports and things like that, if you get hurt, healthcare in the BOP is not like Hogan, Newport Beach.
Right.
And if you get hurt, there are people, I mean, Owen could probably tell you about this, I'm sure. You're just never the same if you get injured in prison. The
'Cause
treatment
it's not
there.
like you're getting this amazing doctor.
Well,
No, you may lay there for hours. There was a guy who tore his ACL, ankle cracked in half. He's in a minimum security camp, so you have fewer resources.
Yeah.
Right.
Most of the resources are at the higher security prison. You got to wait for someone to get there.
Yeah.
Right.
You can't pick up a prisoner, so you're just resting there in terrible pain.
Wow.
You never walk again the same way.
Right.
They're reluctant to take you out of there in a helicopter to a local hospital. It costs money. So I'm not averse to sports. The problem is that's a sport you could really get hurt.
Well, I was just saying to
No,
the
I understand.
judge, though,
It's not a good use of his time for him to be doing that when he should be home. I understand.
he should be home working to
Yes.
pay his tax obligations
Yes.
rather than playing basketball.
understand.
at
Right.
Longport.
I totally agree.
Are you a basketball? Will you be playing some?
Of course I will.
See, he's not going to follow all of my advice prison related.
He doesn't. He doesn't.
But that's
listen.
okay. But I'm going to
I'll
say,
follow
as long-
some.
I'm not your parent.
I'll follow some.
I'm not his parent. I'm not going to tell him what to do. People say to me, "Hey, should I have an iPhone in prison?" I'm like, "I'm not your parent. What is success
I'll
for you?"
definitely stay away from the phone.
I know you will, but you should
But I
do
will.
what you
I
think
will,
is success for you.
I love sporting events.
Yes.
I definitely will do some things that
Yeah.
I'm not doing right now that I don't mind doing.
There's no gambling there.
No, I'm
That
not.
is- okay.
Listen, I'm not looking to get any more trouble. I'm looking to make the best of this. I'll tell you the things I'm really most concerned with for me, because I'm kind of a weird. You're actually very similar. I don't like sleeping in rooms with other people than my wife. So like having bunks with dudes is not snoring and everything. I snore. That's going to be very awkward for me. I know that sounds.
It's not awkward in a light room with people you don't know, with smells and noises
Yes.
that you'll have never heard
Yes.
before. And the whistling too is actually what drove me insane.
That's going to bother me.
What kind of whistling?
Whistling. I can't whistle. Can you whistle?
You mean people whistle, or when they're sleeping they whistle?
No. They think it's cool to walk through the dorm whistling, knowing that it drives people insane.
Oh my God.
And you just keep your mouth shut. You don't say anything.
Yeah.
But it's the noise. It's the snoring.
How about showering? Like I heard the showers are disgusting.
They're probably where I was at Taft was probably better than Lompoc. But you can talk to Michael about Lompoc.
I just spoke to a friend of mine. He got out 2 years ago
Yeah. Well, Michael was there.
at a camp.
Michael went. They transferred him to Taft, where I met him. Mike was in a lot of prisons, as you likely know.
He was, but Michael was in a long time ago. My friend just got out 2 years ago at Lompoc.
Yeah, no, someone in our community just came home from Lompoc.
Yeah, he explained to me north and south.
Yeah, different camps and
He
things
told
like
me
that.
I need to get to north, so I've tried to get all the ends.
Yeah,
so that,
we'll prepare for that. You'll have a job, preferably that'll be like 45 minutes or an hour a day, and that allows you time to work on what's most important.
Yeah.
Back to the sleeping, the benefit of exercising really hard is it helps.
tired.
It helps.
Yeah, you can sleep easier, of course.
Did you sleep when you were in prison?
Yeah, because I exercise so hard.
So
I'm a light sleeper
I thought
now.
you just said that you don't recommend that.
But I went from 5 or 6 hours to a couple. But then you get adjusted like anything else. But also the longer you're there, after about 70 days, I moved from the front of the dorm where it's the new prisoners in a 3-man cubicle and the lights, and you move to the back of the dorm.
They don't turn the lights out at night?
Well, they do, but there's still some lights on because guards are walking. They're doing what's called standing count. So when I was in prison at 10 p.m., 1 a.m., 3 a.m., and 5 a.m., there are counts. And you hear them walking by with the guards with the keys.
Right?
Yeah. So
it's like being in a hospital.
They have
You don't
lights.
sleep.
Right.
So it's never really dark in there. But certainly in the evening they'll turn off some lights.
So that
but once you're there for a while, you move to a better place to live. A good bunk can really ease your adjustment. There's no doubt about that. But Lompoc is different than where I was at Taft. Taft had cubicles. So you'd walk in and you'd have like a little bit of privacy. As I understand, Lompoc is just like a gymnasium with bunks.
Correct.
So it doesn't have the separation, or even some prisons like Sheridan have a pod where there's some, like Barry you talk to, in a pod.
Yeah.
But look, it's all going to be fine.
Right.
It's just a little blip. You'll
And
be
the
there
food,
for.
though, I heard is just disgusting at Lompoc.
Yeah, there's some hustling there at Lompoc because of the farm, guys drinking the chocolate milk and doing things like that.
Yeah.
I actually knew someone who got into trouble because he wrote an article for a major publication and he referenced the chocolate milk from the farm, and that's a disciplinary infraction. They came and got him and they sent him to the hole. So that leads into what you write from prison, especially if you're writing on prisonprofessor.org. They're going to be reading it. We want to write stuff we want them to read, not things that could lead to a disciplinary infraction, which happens to some people because they're reading emails, they're listening to phone calls. They can read mail, though they really don't, but they can. So it's still prison. People think camp, no fences or barbed wire. It's still prison.
Right.
I had a client who went to Dublin, which was the women's federal prison up in Northern
I
California.
think it's closed now.
It is closed now, yes. But she said the food was great.
The food can be good if you learn to cook in the commissary. That's one thing that I did. I used to pay, their job would be to cook. You give them a book of stamps. You can have some of the most creative meals. You can buy tortillas and roast beef. At Taft, they had jalapenos and tomatoes. And you give it to the guys, and they go to the microwave. They would harden the tortilla with some olive oil, and they do the roast beef. And
you get your personal chef back.
There you go.
it was totally it's some of the best meals I've ever had. You learn. The problem is, see, you're having to live on a budget now. It's even worse in prison because you only have $360 a month.
No, it's $180 a week.
No, it's 180 every 2 weeks. He's trying to do my job. It's 180 every other week to total of 360 in the commissary.
Oh, he told me it's 180 a week at Lompoc.
No, that would mean your commissary budget is almost $800 a month. It's not. It's 180 every other week.
Okay.
And when I was in prison, you could do the whole thing at one time, and then you have no money for the rest of the month. Plus, you look kind of like a schmuck carrying everything back from the commissary. It's not a good look.
Okay.
So, but you learn to budget because the 360, it's your shoes and your Walkman, clothes.
I heard you got to buy a toothbrush when you walk in.
Toothbrush, but there'll be a new welcome prisoner packet for you, I'm sure.
Oh, gee, I'm so excited.
Yeah, it's nice. You pay it forward, and when you leave, you'll donate some things too.
Okay.
But it's important to write about it. I think it's important to just memorialize the experience. It would be great for the next book, or even when you come home and update, recalibrate. It should include a chapter on what prison was like, if it's not another book.
And also, I want to know more about it because when my clients ask me what to expect, of course, I refer them to Michael and Justin, but I honestly have never been through this experience. I don't know what it's like, and I don't generally get that kind of feedback from clients.
Well, you can subscribe to my newsletter.
I will.
Yeah.
I absolutely will.
My website will have daily updates.
As well as a link to my website.
That's correct.
The daily updates they're very important because it could also lead, this is the consultant coming out of me, to really influencing your probation officer. Because when you come home, you're going to want to do exactly what I did, which is travel the country to speak. And you want him to approve those trips, or him or her, like the first day immediately, so you can show revenue and letters from universities. A good exercise for you would be What Michael taught me to do, I wrote letters to universities from prison, and I said, like, let me be a guinea pig and answer questions you have. And then schools wrote me, and we'd answer them on the blog. Like, you should do that same thing. You already spoken to me at USC. The time really passes quickly when you do that, but it sets up speaking opportunities when you come home.
I have a question for you. So I've been told, though, it's not like I'm at internet access, right? You can't.
No. You have,
so how do you write to a school, and let's say BYU?
God, you sound like what I used to ask Michael. He'd say, we'd be in the dorm, and he'd say, JP, did you go to USC? And I say, yeah, I went to USC. And he's like, you're just not that resourceful at USC. And I'm like, okay, don't insult where I went to school. So we'd walk from the dorm, and we would go to the library. And he'd say, this is a pen. And this is a piece of, this is what you know, Michael. This is a pen.
Yeah.
This is a piece of paper. And at the time, we couldn't use the typewriters because the warden said you can only use the typewriters if you're dealing with an appellate, your appeal, totally just to punish the prisoner.
Okay.
So like, this is a pen, this is a piece of paper. We're going to write a letter. I'm going to write it for you. Pick a school, USC. Great. Then we're going to write it. Then you're going to call your lovely mother, Tolly, and you're going to say, Mom, can you get me the address for the Marshall School of Business at USC? So I'm like, all right, I can do that. Mom, I need the address. She would send it to me so I didn't waste phone minutes. I'd get it 2 days later. Then he'd say, JP, this is an envelope. This is a stamp. You are going to be sending this letter. And we did that to a bunch of schools, and some started to respond. There wasn't even email or core links when I was in prison. Now you can just do it through email. You can manage like a whole list through email in prison. So you just become resourceful. And it's kind of fun in a way. I like not having email because I figure I'd been on it all day like we are with our iPhones. Mm-hmm. I like that once I wrote something and I put it in that lockbox with a chain on it, it wasn't coming back.
Right.
Like, that's it. It's gone.
Yeah.
That's how Michael got into college and grad school while he was in prison.
Yeah, he had sponsors.
Letters.
He wrote letters. He got in. They sent him books. He did the work. Yeah,
he definitely did the work. So I want to go back and talk about Monaco.
Okay.
So when I think I had been hired at this point, but Chris, who referred us, as I said, he's a marijuana lawyer. He does not do federal work.
Right.
And that's why he brought me in to represent you. Mm-hmm. And you had a trip to Monaco planned.
I did.
And Chris said, oh, well, you haven't been charged yet, so go.
Right.
And I said, no,
Yeah.
No, I have to call the U.S. attorney.
Correct.
And I called the U.S. attorney and I said, hey, he has this prepaid trip to Monaco. He would like to go. Is that okay with you? And they said, yes, it's fine. We don't think he's a flight risk, but it's a good thing you called.
Right.
And I know that if I had not called them, that you would have been arrested at the airport and you would have been in custody.
No doubt. They already, sorry to cut you off, but they really gave us a hard time coming back in anyway. Remember, actually, the U.S. attorney even apologized for them even when I told them what happened.
Right.
Which was like 2 hours of harassment, more towards Nicole, sadly, in the back customs area.
Right.
Because they obviously saw the case or something.
Right.
Whatever.
Well, so what happens when somebody is under investigation and close to being indicted or charged one way or another is that the U.S. Attorney's Office notifies NCIS. I think those are the initials. And NCIS is the agency, something to do with customs, so your name is on this list.
Right.
And if you go through customs with your passport, bing, there's like a bing,
of course.
And they're going to stop you.
Yeah.
And I had one person in my almost 30-year career who had a meeting with the U.S. attorney. We knew she was in a lot of trouble. And I got a call a couple of weeks later from the U.S. attorney saying your client was arrested at the airport. She purchased a one-way ticket to whatever country, and she was leaving. And so she ended up spending the rest of her pretrial time in custody, and that would have happened to you because you would have been deemed a flight risk.
Right.
And so that's something that a lot of lawyers don't even know. They're just like, yeah, go ahead. You haven't been charged. You can go. You're not on bail. You can't.
Yeah, you're asking for a problem.
Yeah, because then you will be deemed a flight risk. Because so you had mentioned pretrial services before, and most people don't know what that is. When you are we call it being on bond in federal court. So after you've been charged, you go to court, you enter a plea of not guilty, you're interviewed by an entity that is called pretrial services. And they prepare a very basic report. It's like the probation report, but it doesn't include a lot of the stuff that probation does.
Right.
And it is so that the judge can make a determination about whether they're going to keep you in custody or let you stay out on bond or bail. But we don't use bail bondsmen in federal court, so it's called bond. It's like somebody will sign for you, or there are multiple different ways to post a bond. And So when pretrial interviews you and they prepare their report, they're going to look at your travel history and they will say, multiple trips out of the country. If somebody goes to Mexico to visit their family, they'll say, oh, he's a flight risk because he has family in Mexico or because he's traveled to Mexico. And I'm sure you've got plenty of stamps in your passport. So they would have probably made a recommendation for detention because you travel out of the country all the time.
Okay.
And of course, our argument is he can't. You've got his passport. He has no money. And they're going to say, I don't care. He'll find a way and he's going to flee. And so you are stuck in custody for the duration of your case. So for anybody who's listening to this who might potentially have criminal charges or an investigation is ongoing and you want to travel, definitely call your lawyer first, have your lawyer call the prosecutor, because even your lawyer may not know that you're not supposed to travel. If they don't think that you've been ordered to remain in this certain district where you live, they're going to think, well, you can just go. But
not.
You can't.
Okay.
But yes, so you almost got in trouble by going to Monaco. But then the great thing was you got to go.
Yeah.
I think that was your last trip.
No, because you got me approval to go to Italy.
That's right. You went to Italy for your father-in-law's birthday.
I did.
But as far as Monaco is concerned, I think you were banned.
Unfortunately.
After
yes.
that. Yes.
Yeah, because we were supposed to go back there, but no.
And I did a footnote. I don't know if you saw that in my sentencing memo that said not only is he had 2 years of recovery, not gambling, but he's also been banned from every casino in the world.
Which is true.
Yeah. I mean, that was a footnote and I thought it was funny, but.
Well, that kind of also speaks to some of the collateral consequences that come up in mitigation. It's not just the prison term. Even if you got probation, there's a lot you have to contend with moving forward. And I think the judge got a good sense of that.
Absolutely. Well, and so you're not allowed to gamble while you're on probation. So pretrial supervision is what happens before you are sentenced.
Right.
Then once you serve your sentence, you come out of prison and you are on supervision or supervised release.
Supervised release.
Which is essentially probation. They're both essentially probation.
Right.
It's kind of two different names for the same office and the same function. They supervise you. They monitor your travel. They monitor, if you owe restitution, where your money is going, et cetera. They, you have to submit to a certain number of drug tests, whether drugs have ever been an issue in your life or not. It's just part of what they do. And then the judge will also say, you have to participate in mental health counseling. You have to participate in inpatient treatment based on probation's recommendation. And that's the part where you're hearing, what? He has to do all this stuff? No, not necessarily, unless you have a nervous breakdown and probation thinks you need to go into therapy or go into a lockdown program or you start shooting heroin or whatever it is. But generally speaking, these are just general terms that they impose on everyone just in case so that probation can monitor you and do what they need to do to help you. And you are their responsibility as well. So for somebody who's not as resourceful as you and not as hardworking and not as driven, they have to help them find work. There are lists of felon-friendly employers, but the probation office is responsible for you. And so if you're struggling when you get out of prison, they have to provide you with resources. They don't often do that, but you have to hold their feet to the fire as well and say, hey, I need help.
Makes sense. I didn't know that.
Some are very proactive in helping. Some, like everything, some case managers will be really responsive to what you do. Some don't care so much. It's just easier when you're released if you're able to do exactly what you want to do. You've just got to continue everything you've been doing, right?
Which I actually wanted to ask you about a case manager I don't understand that still. I have a small understanding, but somebody watching this probably doesn't even know what that is. But that is a person in the prison, correct, that handles prisoners, and specifically case will be that specific person will always be my case manager
unless they get reassigned or quit or get fired.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are they on the facility 24 hours or?
No, that's their job. They go there to work and they go home to their family.
Okay.
In a lot of the prisons inside of the dorm, there'll be the offices for a case manager, for a counselor, and that you may be assigned to them. So if that's the person that could process visitation forms, if you want to switch jobs, you want to get a new bunk, things of that nature. If you're going to do an attorney-client call, it could be done inside of their office. They could get recommendations from on how much put in for how much halfway house time or how much confinement time you're going to get. If you surrender to prison, you'll have a plan that we've created and worked on. You want to give it to them. Ask that it become part of the central file. Ask that they read it. When you go back for what's called a team meeting, you would meet with your case manager. You're going to ask questions. What are you doing? What programming are you participating in? Are you productive? any problems or disciplinary infractions. So where some people make mistakes with case managers is they'll think, well, this person's disengaged. They don't really care or know what I'm doing. But they're working there all day. They have a sense of if you're watching TV or exercising or writing or programming. So everyone goes back and they want something, because if you're in prison, you have one goal: to get out earlier. And they may say, I need more halfway house time, or I want to get home. I've earned it. And that case manager generally knows who you associate with, the friendships you have formed, if you're doing the right things or if you're not. So they have a lot of discretion. And I think a lot of people underestimate their influence, or they'll dismiss it and say, she didn't like my plan, she blew me off, nothing matters. And I would argue they do that in part to test you, to see how you're going to respond. And of course, a lot of prisoners just stand outside the office and say, I have to get home to my family, and there's health issues, there's a job waiting for me. And case managers are focused on the victims, the judge, and the sentence. They respect the prosecutor and the victims more than you. So it has to be a different message. Rather than ask for it, it's like, here's why I'm earning it. And that person has a lot of influence in how quickly you will leave Lompoc. I mean, Michael uses the analogy of like A, B, C, D, or F. And F is you're serving 10 and a half months. Right? A D is you serve less than 10 and a half months because you're engaged in some first act program and you're going to get earned time credits. Okay. That could be 9.5 months. That's a D. We want to get you like an A.
Right.
And you do that not just by programming and avoiding problems, but by having them recommend that you go like directly home as quickly as possible, because you're eligible for release the day you get there. The day you get there, you're eligible to go home under the law. Now, that's not going to happen, but could it after 3 months? Why not? 4 months? Yeah, that would be an A. That's what we're building towards.
And so, Justin, you are going to give Matt all the information that he needs so that he is fully equipped when he walks into prison to be prepared to be released as soon as possible?
We're going to try to build the A. And I think he's been building the A over the last 2 years. He has a probation report that recommended a shorter sentence. That's a good thing to begin with, because they tend to recommend longer sentences or guideline sentences.
Let me ask you this. So the probation report generally has a section that talks about acceptance of responsibility. Mm-hmm. And normally, like not my clients, but people will walk in there and they'll say, whatever.
My bad. I accept responsibility.
I accept responsibility for what I did. Right. So, of course, all of my clients write these beautiful narratives that your company hopefully helps them write. Mm-hmm. And, the letter starts with their statement of remorse. Mm-hmm. And it's usually paragraphs of remorse and then, accepting responsibility for what they did and the harm that they may or may not have caused, and how they intend to change as a person.
Right.
And by writing this letter in advance of the probation interview and by actually emailing a Word document to the probation officer, they copy and paste that information directly into their pre-sentence report.
Right.
That pre-sentence report then goes to the case manager, and the case manager hopefully reads it and sees that these are Matt's words, that Matt is not just spouting off what's expected of him, but he's gone way above and beyond. How much of an impact does that have?
So there's a lot of benefits to it. So if you get this letter into the completed probation report well before sentencing, the judge can see that you took the time to write it. Judge Bennett told Michael Santos that. He said, I would be astoundingly impressed if I knew a defendant took the time to write this letter and get it in the report. I could read the report several times and really think it through thoughtfully rather than just reviewing a letter the night before sentencing.
Right.
So it can certainly influence the report, and I think it influenced the recommendation this officer made, because she could see that he took the time to write it. But moreover, it's sentencing. Judges have said, like, what are some things that I did not read in the probation report? So you were able to express between the probation interview, Your Honor, and sentencing. He spoke at a USC. He volunteered extensively with Prison Professor Charitable Corporation. 1 million people are benefiting from work that he created with Michael. That proves that he said, I'm sorry and I'm going to do better. And he's continuing to do better and be sorry. So then when he goes to prison, this case manager can see like this body of work that's building. So when he says, I'm going to be productive, it's not BS. He's got a body of work that he could rely on, which just makes him look more credible, because something I think defendants have to do is like put themselves in the shoes of a case manager or a judge or a prosecutor. What are they going to say?
Right.
To the extent that you can kind of create a message and try to take the words out of their mouth, I think you're more successful.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about allocution.
Sure.
Allocution is, every defendant has an absolute right to be heard at their sentencing hearing. And I have heard judges at conferences, federal judges say,
I've been to some with you.
yes, you have. And I was trying to remember if you were at this particular
in
one.
San Diego, Judge Bowyer, Gonzalez Rogers, yes.
And he said, when somebody says, I'm sorry, I want to know what they've done to prove it.
Right.
So if they're just saying, Your Honor, I'm sorry, that doesn't mean anything to me.
Right.
And I've told both of you that I've seen so many people get up and say, Your Honor, I want to apologize to the court. I want to apologize to my family. And it's like fingernails on a blackboard to me.
Right.
Because you can apologize to your family in the privacy of your own home, but and you don't need to apologize to the judge. What you need to do is accept responsibility for your actions completely. And what do you do in the interim between the time that you're charged and the time that you're sentenced to prove that you really, truly are remorseful? So did you pay restitution?
Right.
Yes. And even if you can't afford $1.6 million, did you set aside $50 a month or $50 a week or whatever you could possibly afford to show the judge, here's $5,000. This is the best I could do, but at least you made an effort. And judges want to see you. They want you to put your money where your mouth is. And so everything that you're talking about, all of these steps that Matt took, including writing his letter and getting, going to therapy and going to Gamblers Anonymous. Unfortunately, that was court ordered, but doing community service, which was not court ordered, and all of the things that, you've encouraged and facilitated for him, the things that I've encouraged him to do, that shows the judge that he is serious, that he does mean it when he says he's sorry, that he did accept responsibility for his actions. And what is your plan going forward? What are you going to do when you get out of prison? And I know now, based on the support system that you have and these goals you've clearly set and what you've accomplished during this time period, that you are not going to come back into this courtroom and you are not going to reoffend and you are not going to violate your supervised release. And so the judge can take a chance with you.
Well, that's why the time before is so important, if used well. I think more important than even volunteering is working. So a consequence, he can't be a bookmaker, he has to go do something else. And then you've removed what he used to do, right? So like I've been to sentencing hearings where a judge has said to a lawyer, like, okay, it's kind of a big deal. You can't be a lawyer anymore. That's a really significant consequence. And I know you went on to start something, or you're a paralegal or something where you are no longer a lawyer, which is a lawyer. It's like a big deal, losing your license. It's an identity. It was hard to go to law school and do what you do. So I think working, which he did, is very important, even if it's picking up phones or selling turf, because then you're building a new record as a law-abiding citizen, you're paying taxes, you're productive. And that is as important, I would argue at times, as even paying restitution, because some judges may discount the restitution if you have the means. It's the people that might not have the means that work incredibly hard doing things that one would argue is beneath their skill set. Well, that has led to some really good outcomes.
You mentioned collateral consequences. And one of the things is that, you can't have certain licenses if you're a convicted felon.
Right. Can't even be a barber. You can't use scissors.
Really?
Yeah. I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either.
You have no hair, dude. No one's
That's true. Good point. But I can still cut hair.
Yeah, that's true.
But you can't be a real estate agent. You can't be an insurance agent.
Stockbroker.
It's much harder with a white-collar crime. I mean, there are some isolated cases. There are certainly even some sex offenders who have a law license. There are some lawyers who have felony convictions.
Right.
Mostly state, probably more drug-related, not necessarily a white-collar crime, but there are certainly some that have. But we were at that conference together when Judge Richard Bowyer, he spoke about, he was very engaging. He said, the guidelines mean nothing to me. And Judge Gonzalez Rogers kind of shook her head. She's like, that's always my starting point. And then he said something very funny. He said, I know the white-collar people aren't going to the penitentiary. I've been to a penitentiary. They're not going to no penitentiary. And then he went on to say, good mitigation helps me understand all of the collateral consequences of this conviction. I can't be a doctor or a lawyer anymore. I've been debanked.
Right.
My reputation is absolutely shattered. I've impacted my family. My children are in therapy. We've moved, right? I'm setting aside 50% of what I make for restitution. I think you did a good job of selling those collateral consequences, but enough defendants. I think a lot of lawyers only focus on prison. Like, my only job is to keep you out of prison. And that's important. But more than that is, regardless of the sentence, like, what does the rest of their life look like? It's much harder. Even people that remain very wealthy, there's still consequences to being part of the felon class, right? And I think a judge, they need to know these things, right? It's not.
Well, and, a judge's response, like when you say, don't take him away from his family. I learned this very early on in my career, where you say, please don't punish his children. And the judge will say, he punished his children. I am
Right.
not punishing the
Right.
children.
They
He
feel like
committed
they're
the
being
crime.
manipulated.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so,
I could see that though. I mean,
you made choices that put you in this situation.
Right.
So you're the one who's paying the price, and your family, unfortunately, is also paying the price.
of course.
But, the same thing is, he's lost his career, he's lost his license. It depends on the judge. And that is a really serious problem, because as much as the federal sentencing guidelines attempt to make a consistent sentencing strategy throughout the country, it really depends on what judge you're in front of. Because if we were in a certain judge's courtroom in Los Angeles, you probably would have gotten home confinement. Whereas we were in Judge Holcomb's court, he's very conservative. And, I argued to him, the federal sentencing guidelines were mandatory up until the year 2000. So the judge had to sentence somebody pursuant to the sentencing guidelines, unless there were one of the enumerated departures. And it's a big book. It's our Bible, just like PSR's prison Bible. The federal sentencing guidelines is ours. And then in 2000, there was a case that said, for specific reasoning, these guidelines are now advisory. So it is the starting point for most judges. It is certainly what the U.S. Attorney and probation go by still to this day, 25 years later. But judges have discretion to do whatever they want, as long as there's not a statutory mandatory minimum. And yet, so many of these judges, even Judge Holcomb, who started long after the guidelines were advisory, he's only been on the bench, 6 years or...
Yeah, he's only 62. He's not.
He was appointed by Trump in his last
Right.
administration. So, he hasn't been on the bench that long. But even he is still kind of goes by the guidelines, which I argued to him over and over. What you're imposing here is a guideline sentence. Mm-hmm. And this is so far outside of what we call the heartland of cases. That was the word that was used in this case, Booker, that overturned the guidelines, essentially. And yet he still felt compelled to give a guideline sentence. Mm-hmm. Again, I've said this over and over since Friday. I understand his reasoning. I really do understand his reasoning, but I still don't accept it.
Yeah, sure.
I think you did great.
Thank you.